Hey, everybody, welcome. I am so glad to be here with all of you tonight. We're going to have yet another great late night conversation. So, yeah, thanks, everybody. 4th of July is tomorrow. Today is July 3rd. A lot of great things are going on, but we're going to talk about a lot of different stuff tonight. So here we go.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Hey, everybody. Good to see you. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're going to have yet another great late night chat. Looking forward to it. I had a long day out in the sun filming, but hey, I love my job. I love doing the work I do as a reporter for international television. I really love what I do. So I was out in the sun, filmed, very fulfilling. And now I'm here, and tomorrow is the holiday. Gonna hopefully have some time to go to the movies with my wife tomorrow, fit it in. I do plan to stream tomorrow evening. We do have our CPI meeting of members tomorrow afternoon, but it looks like there's going to be a window that I can go and see the new Supergirl movie with my wife. And that'll be nice. You just have to be thankful for what you have. And if there's anything that I'm thankful for, it is our community, the Center for Political Innovation. We have a tremendous group of people. We had a rally yesterday in New York City that went very, very well. Good turnout. I got to see, I could start naming names, but people probably don't want me to name names, but I saw a good crew of people. A good crew of people came out. I'm editing the video of our rally that we did yesterday. It went really, really well. And I love our community. And yeah, the Center for Political Innovation is marching ahead. Now, in terms of tonight, we're going to follow our usual format, which is first I give my opening remarks, then we do the roll call, and then I answer your questions for the remainder of the show. So if there's something you would like me to talk about in the second half of our show, please send a question via Buy Me a Coffee. You can also do super chats because we're monetized. Super chats work. You can do Rumble rants on the Rumble. Second half of the show is me answering you all's questions. So send me some good questions. Hit me with your best shot in the second half of the show. So in terms of announcements, the Center for Political Innovation, we are heading towards our national 7-day training program, which will be coinciding with our national convention. August 12th to 19th is our national 7-day training program. August 15th in Chicago is our national convention. The day beforehand, we'll be having a France out of Africa rally, and that'll be in Chicago near the French consulate. Very exciting. A lot of great stuff is happening, folks. Our community of anti-imperialists is growing. Like I said, we just had a great rally in New York City yesterday, anti-war rally for July 4th. A video of that is coming soon. A lot of great things are happening. The Center for Political Innovation is marching ahead. You should become a member today. Yes, it is an absolutely tremendous community of people. You look at the great work that is being done in LA by our LA team. You look at the great work that's being done in Minneapolis. You look at the great rally we had in New York City, video of it soon. Yesterday, we hit Times Square. No one's doing it like we're doing it. And we got a great network of supporters and we have great allies. And CPI, we are building the anti-imperialist movement that this country urgently needs. So I would encourage you to get involved with the Center for Political Innovation. I will say that we now have this neat little book of quotations that's available. It's called Innovationism, a book of quotations. It's a basic introduction to what we're all about. Just quotes from my presentations over the years, on different topics kind of assembled. So if you want to learn kind of what is unique about our approach and our understanding, our kind of optimistic vision, we now have this book. You can get it on Amazon. It's available, and it's got a high-speed train, which is kind of the symbol that's on the cover of almost all of our like little pamphlets. It's also got Kim Il-sungya, the flower, on there. This is our new little booklet that we've put out, Innovationism. So that's very exciting. So yeah, I'm really excited for August. It's going to be great. And thank you. We had a fundraiser the other day. Thank you to everyone who donated. And if you still want to send us a donation to make August go more smoothly, please do. We're trying to get everything lined up so that our August convention in Chicago goes smoothly. I'm very, very excited about it. So I hope that you will get involved with CPI because we are America's anti-imperialist movement. So yeah, we're going to jump right into tonight's opening remarks. We'll be following our usual format. As I said before, first I give my opening remarks. Then from there, we do the roll call. Then I answer your questions for the second half of the show. So if you think of something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show while I'm talking here in the opening, go to Buy Me a Coffee, send me the question. You can also super chat because we're monetized. You can also do a Rumble rant if you're on the Rumble. There are various ways that you can send your questions. Send questions for the second half of the show. All right. So we're going to jump right into it. So tonight, I am increasingly blown away by how relevant everything we talk about on these streams is. This is not really a news YouTube channel. I mean, I am a news reporter. That's my day job. That's what pays my bills. And I'm an anti-imperialist, and I report for an anti-imperialist network, based in Russia. And I am an anti-imperialist, absolutely. News is my bread and butter. It's my day-to-day. I mean, I follow world events. But, as you know, if you watch this channel, we're not really a news channel. We give analysis. We go into historical topics, economics, psychology, ideology. We go into really big depth here, right? And there is a lot of channels that are similar to us, that I go on that are more news focused. Jimmy Dore is a great friend of ours. I've been on Jimmy Dore's show 3 times at this point. Twice when he was hosting, once when it was being guest hosted by Keaton from Do Dissidents. And it's a news channel, right? Jimmy Dore is a comedian, but he gives like kind of news analysis. Do Dissidents. They're good friends of ours. We're good friends with Truthwire. Our good friend Pasta was just on his show. Kim Iverson. They do like news channels, right? They do the news and they give kind of comments on the news. We do something different, which is we kind of give overall understanding. We do deep dives into the history of communism and the history of socialism and anti-imperialism. We do deep dives into spirituality, deep dives into a lot of different things. We do slideshows. I'm doing a slideshow here tonight. And we dig deep into topics. And MKUltra, the CIA mind control program of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, is something we've talked about on this channel many times. And now it's in the headlines. They just had a new hearing about MKUltra on Capitol Hill. And they've revealed some new information about CIA Project MKUltra. And I did report on those hearings in the capacity of my job as a reporter on RT. And tonight we're going to complement my reporting on that. We're going to complement that with a slideshow. But first, before we do that, as everyone's kind of coming in, right? People are trickling in. I just started 9 minutes ago. We're going to show my RT report that I did about the latest developments. And then we're going to go way deeper into it with a slideshow. So we'll start out with my RT report about the latest hearings and the latest revelations of MKUltra. And then I will give you the whole story in a slideshow. There's a lot here. This is a really, really important thing. And our effectiveness as an anti-imperialist organization is rooted in our understanding of what went on with MKUltra. Nobody understands this the way we understand this. We have a level of depth that nobody Nobody has, right? And that's what makes CPI special. That's why we continue to grow and expand. So yeah, I'm going to put on my RT report. It's a longer one because it's a big topic. It's not a simple topic. Then we'll do the slideshow. So this was my RT report on MKUltra that I did on the new MKUltra hearings that they had on Capitol Hill.
Now, it was the Cold War program intended to find ways of mind control. And all these decades later, secrets are still emerging about the dark past of the CIA's MKUltra scheme. Investigative reporters have presented more evidence to Congress, from a correspondent depicting unspoken horrors to the potential link between the program, a cult leader, and the assassination of President Kennedy. And that's amid Donald Trump's promises to declassify more files. RT's Caleb Maupin has the story.
An oversight committee of the U.S. House of Representatives is now going through loads and loads of documents from a dark chapter in American history, Project MKUltra, the CIA's investigation into mind control involving all kinds of illegal and frightening activities back in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. It's widely acknowledged that back in those days, the CIA did a lot of nasty things. They dosed people with hallucinogens to see how they might react. They hypnotized people. They developed methods of psychological torture, seeing just how much it takes to push someone over the edge into psychosis. It all sounds like something out of a horror movie, but the CIA now admits they did all of that and worse.
The CIA conducted terrifying experiments using drugs, hypnosis, isolation, sensory deprivation, and other extreme techniques on human subjects, often U.S. citizens, who frequently had no idea what was being done to them or that they were part of a CIA test.
As Congress goes over the newly released documents, the name of one Dr. Louis Jolyon Jolly West keeps coming up. Now, he was involved in experiments intended to alter people's memories and reinvent their personalities. And it's now proven he was working with the CIA.
After becoming intrigued by the allegations against West, I learned that UCLA, his last academic home, had inherited his paper following his death in 1999. Nearly 2 months and more than 200 boxes later, I found the proverbial needle in a haystack: correspondence between West and Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the architect of MKUltra.
In 1953, just months after the program was authorized, letters started going back and forth between project overseer Sidney Gottlieb and Dr. West, who was then the chief psychiatrist at Bayes Hospital on Lackland Air Force Base, located in San Antonio, Texas. The experiments conducted on human subjects are horrifying. They remind you of the Nazis and Dr. Mengele. And why not? It's no secret that after the Second World War, all kinds of Nazi intelligence officers were recruited by the newly formed CIA. That's a matter of public record.
In his first letter to Gottlieb, West proposed conducting experiments on unwitting human subjects, including military personnel, prisoners, and psychiatric patients at the Bayes Hospital. He then outlined the experiments themselves in 6 more pages that could have been written by Joseph Mengele. Using LSD in combination with hypnosis, West proposed inducing confusion, amnesia, and specific mental disorders in people who would remember nothing of their interaction with him afterward. He sought to develop techniques to extract true information and implant false information in unwilling subjects, and to alter the attitudes and beliefs of, quote, previously loyal individuals.
But it wasn't enough to see how people reacted while in captivity as lab rats. The agency wanted to see how people responded to their mind control techniques and manipulation out in the hustle and bustle of the world.
These experiments, he wrote, must eventually be put to test in practical trials in the field. Gottlieb's response could hardly have been more enthusiastic. My good friend, he wrote, I had been wondering whether your apparent rapid and comprehensive grasp of our problems could possibly be real. You have indeed developed an admirably accurate picture of exactly what we are after.
It turns out Dr. West had figured out how to alter people's memories and reinvent their identities.
He announced that he had learned how to replace true memories with false memories in people without their knowledge. It was, in fact, the central ambition of the MKUltra operation.
So who did all of this get tested on? One subject was Charles Manson. He became known to the world after the killings in Hollywood of Sharon Tate and others.
You know, if I wanted to kill somebody, I'd take this book and beat you to death with it, and I wouldn't feel a thing. It'd be just like walking to the drugstore.
Do you feel blame? Are you mad? Do you feel like and
then there was Jack Ruby, who shot Lee Harvey Oswald just after he was arrested for killing U.S. President Kennedy. Documents pretty well confirm that these two major players in the political drama of America in the 1960s and 70s were themselves caught up in CIA mind control research.
Before we wrap up, is it in your expert opinion that Jack Ruby and Manson were assets of the intelligence agencies specifically pertaining to MKUltra? Were they MKUltra victims?
Yeah, theoretically, Manson, I've never been able to prove absolutely. Jack Ruby, I believe, this is something else. They knew who West was. They knew that what West was capable of and what they had paid him to do and what he had reported to them that he could do, including inducing mental disorders in people. That was never disclosed to the commission as far as anyone knows. So I believe that West was put in there to keep Jack Ruby from telling his story.
The CIA had brought in all kinds of former Nazis to work with them against Soviet communism with Operation Paperclip. In the name of stopping Russia, a lot of very evil things were done.
Kurt Blome, who was the chief of biological weapons development for the Nazi government, came to work for the CIA. So did Walter Schreiber, who was the Surgeon General of the Nazi Army. I found what I think might be the first secret CIA prison or black site. It's a nice chalet in Germany. And the guy who now owns it took me into the basement. He said these were the cells where the MKUltra officers, working side by side with Nazis, carried out those gruesome experiments, which were actually just continuations of the experiments that those Nazis had been conducting just a few years earlier right down the road.
Somehow, the fact that Charles Manson and Jack Ruby were mixed up in CIA project MKUltra got left out of the Church Committee hearings in 1977, where the sinister program was first revealed to the world before the U.S. Congress.
The revelations in the Times led directly to the congressional hearings held later that year. West's denials, however, were effective. He was never investigated, and his name never came up at the hearings.
So now, almost 50 years after the CIA mind control program became public, we now know that Dr. West was an operative, and that ties the program to all kinds of explosive events. Donald Trump says there's more info to be revealed.
Real quick question. You've got D&I Pulte over there as the new director. We also know you have the task force set up on declassification, maybe talking about international, maybe looking at some declassification. Are you able to give us an update on that?
Declassify almost everything. Bill is there just for a fairly short period of time. But while he's there, I said you can declassify whatever you want.
The CIA did lots of evil things 50 years ago. But the bigger question should be, what are they doing now? In the age of information technology, when AI bots can collect and analyze data on individuals rather quickly, what's possible 50 years ago might seem like mere child's play. Caleb Maupin, RT, New York.
An RT producer who wrote a book on the CIA's dealings in connection to the MKUltra program says that the hearings produced few results, while the situation around the investigation remains suspicious.
For the first time in 50 years, Congress has reopened hearings on MKUltra, and frankly, the results was deeply unsettling. I'm following this because I'm currently working on the second edition of my book on MKUltra, while also preparing its English release. So naturally, I was encouraged to see these hearings finally happen, because this matters. The world deserves the truth about what the CIA under Allen Dulles did to American citizens and foreign nationals alike, including its post-war ties to Nazi doctors involved in some of history's terrible crimes. But after 90 minutes of testimony, one thing became clear. These hearings raised far more questions than it answered. Almost nothing presented was new, like nothing. Almost everything that was discussed has already been public for years. And crucial, there were no clear answers about if MKUltra still influences events in America today. That matters, because this was not a minor operation. MKUltra consumed decades, millions of dollars, and enormous institutional resources. Yet, instead of hard answers, we got theories. And you know what? Mainstream Western media have barely covered these hearings. Why? Because even more than half a century later, MKUltra remains one of the most secret and terrifying projects ever run by the CIA. Its scale, real outcomes and human cost remain largely hidden. The CIA may still hide in something significant. Still, that hearings offered one reason for hope. Lawmakers promised to identify victims of MKUltra allegedly tortured at the CIA facilities in Germany. If that efforts move forward, it could finally expose the full horror of what happened. And perhaps explain why the shadows of that era still remain with us today.
Yeah. So that was my report. But there's a lot of background that we can get into here. And like the guest, the producer who has written a book on MKUltra said, there was not really much new information revealed. But we're going to get into all of that because you have to get the context for all of this. So tonight we got a slideshow. The CIA's MKUltra project. What can we learn? So it all starts with the Korean War. In the Korean War, the Korean War is a war that was so ugly. People don't realize how ugly the Korean War was. Like 3 to 4 million people died in the Korean War. Every building above 1 story tall in North Korea was destroyed. They sent the pilots, American pilots, into North Korea to bomb everything they could, and they would come back with their bombs still on their planes. They'd say, there's nothing left to bomb. They bombed the dams and flooded places. They blew up every building over 1 story tall. It was a massive, massive war that had a huge cost in terms of human life. During that war, very famously, Douglas MacArthur threatened to drop 15 atomic bombs on China. Because China was supporting North Korea, and he did that without asking the president's permission, and he was fired, and that was a big moment. And the Korean War was a really, really ugly war. And the North Koreans were backed up by China because China was very afraid that if North Korea were toppled and the USA had already set up military bases in South Korea, the USA would use that as a launching pad to invade China. And millions of Chinese people fought on the Korean Peninsula against the United States. And Mao Zedong's own son, Mao and Yang, died in the Korean War on the Korean Peninsula. And basically, once China got involved, once China moved its forces in, they weren't intimidated by the U.S. threat of the atomic bomb. The war, they turned the tide of the war. So during the Korean War, thousands of American soldiers were taken captive by the North Koreans, including a U.S. Army general. Wild story, but the only U.S. Army general to have ever been taken captive was taken captive during the Korean War. And I actually have his autobiography. It's fascinating. There have been other, there have been U.S. Marine Corps generals who've been taken captive, but the only U.S. Army general to have ever been taken captive was taken captive during the Korean War. And they captured a number of American soldiers. And these American soldiers, when they were taken captive, they were taken to China, largely. They weren't kept on the Korean Peninsula. They were taken to China. And in China, they underwent what they called thought reform. Thought reform or self-criticism, right? If you're familiar with Chinese communism, eventually in the 1960s, they published this book, this little red book of Mao Zedong's writings. But this was already a big part of Chinese communism. Was they have what they called criticism and self-criticism, which is that people are encouraged to look inward and ask, am I doing my best? Are my motivations pure? Am I doing the right thing? And that that especially after the communists took power, the prisons in New China were different than the prisons in other countries. Generally, the way it is in most countries is if you commit a crime, you're sentenced to this many years in prison. What they did in China with people that were what they called political criminals, people that were trying to overthrow the Communist Party, was they didn't give them a specific sentence. They put them in the prison. And the idea was that when they engaged in thought reform and proved that they were no longer against the revolution, they would let them out. And the term for thought reform in Chinese literally is brainwash. And that's where the word brainwash comes from. And it's a mistranslation. It literally is brainwash. What they're saying is when you've reformed your thought, right? You know, if a guy is raping women, when he goes to prison, he has to study the oppression of women. He has to, you know, hear testimony from rape victims. He has to hear psychologists talk about how rape is a horrendous crime. And when they're convinced that he's understood what a horrendous thing he's done to women, and he understands that one should not do such a thing, he's let out of prison, right? And that Alan Rickett, who was an American spy in China, and he didn't even realize he was a spy. He was just an American living in China who would meet with U.S. military officials and give them all kinds of information. Alan Rickett underwent it, and he wrote a very interesting book, which I would recommend, called Prisoners of Liberation, which I've talked about on streams before, about what it was like. And as an American, this guy, Alan Rickett, and I'll pull up his book here, and he gave lectures as an American who underwent thought reform in a Chinese prison. Alan and his wife, Adele Rickett, wrote this whole book about what it was like, and he was an American guy, and he underwent, thought reform in a Chinese prison. And he wrote back about it, and he went to Harvard University and gave lectures about it in the 1970s. And he talks about it. And it's kind of fascinating because he's in a prison in a very impoverished developing country. China had just had the revolution in the 1950s. And yet it sounds like in his prison cell, he's kind of going through group therapy, and that he and his fellow prisoners have to talk about their relationships and their time with their parents. And I mean, it was kind of an interesting thing, but it was rehabilitation. And it was a big part of Maoist communism was rehabilitation. And it was called thought reform and criticism, self-criticism. Members of the Communist Party were encouraged to engage in criticism, self-criticism, which is in Mao's little red book, criticize yourself and say, am I doing my best to be a communist? And criticizing other people if they think they're, having shortcomings, right? And that's when they talk about struggle sessions and all of that. And then in the prisons, they had this process called thought reform. Well, in American media, it freaked everybody out that over 5,000 American soldiers were captured during the Korean War. And almost all of them, at some point, denounced the American government. Not all of them, but a good number of them confessed to war crimes, recorded and had confessions of war crimes that were broadcast, denounced the American government. Some of them announced loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party and all of this. American media was completely flipped out by this. This didn't make any sense. These were good, wholesome boys from Iowa and Kansas who loved America so much they had joined the military and they had fought, and yet they were loyal to the communists. They got captured and they went over to the communist side. And there became a huge fascination with this in American media. And if you read the reports from this era, it is frustrating because if you read what actually went on during the Korean War, if you read what, Bruce Cummings, the American professor has written about, Bruce Cummings is considered the top scholar of Korean history in America. You read his books, about the Korean War. You watch his documentary, The Unknown War, that was aired on BBC. That they wouldn't allow it to be aired on PBS because they said American audiences couldn't handle it. The Korean War was such an ugly war where there was so much slaughter of civilians and so much torture and so much bombing and so much killing. But yet American media, it never occurred to them that these American soldiers that were doing horrendous things and killing children and I mean, we're bombing villages and we're looking at the dead bodies of the innocent women and children they were killed. It never occurred to them that any of them might actually have remorse for what they did or become convinced of the other side. It's just assumed that, China and Korea are wrong. America is 100% right. So it must be that, China has some magical voodoo, right? Do mind control, hypnosis, because clearly there couldn't be another side to the story. And that is something, it's not just the Korean War, it's everything in American history. There's this arrogance, this assumption that everyone who fought for China and the revolution, everyone who fought for Stalin was just clearly an idiot, right? Because everybody knows communism just doesn't work. You have to be retarded to believe in communism. Communists think everyone should get paid the exact same wage. That wouldn't work. There's no incentive. American anti-communism is really, really stupid. They have absolutely no idea. These people have never even heard the phrase means of production. There's a lot of it on the internet right now because Trump is fighting with the Democrats, and the Democrats have this new Democratic Socialist wing. And what American conservatives think communism is so far from what any communist or Marxist has taught, right? They think communism is taxes. It's just when the government taxes people and redistributes the income and gives poor people free stuff, and that doesn't work. Well, socialism doesn't work because you run there's this arrogance. We assume, all the millions of people who died fighting for Mao, all the millions of people who died fighting for Stalin, all the people who died fighting for Fidel Castro, all the admiration for Fidel Castro around the world, they're all just complete idiots, because everybody knows if you just pay everyone the same wage, it doesn't work. They must be idiots, right? There's this arrogance behind anti-communism, this assumption that there couldn't possibly be any argument in communism's favor, that none of these communist governments ever did anything good for anybody. They were all just poor and starving the whole time. There's this arrogance, and that comes across in these reports. And so that's the frustrating thing. But amid that arrogance, right, I mean, they can't understand, how did all of these American soldiers become convinced that their government was wrong? And they became aware that, China did have this thought reform program. And so in American media, there was a huge amount of interest in brainwashing. And it was all through American media. And there was a novel, a best-selling novel they made into a movie called The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, right? Manchuria is the region of China where Korean War, POWs were held. And there's this whole Hollywood movie, and it was a novel about an American guy who's running for Congress as a Republican conservative, but he's secretly under the control of the communists, and they pull out, the ace of spades, and they hold up the card, and that and suddenly he's hypnotized. And, there was a lot of science fiction movies about brainwashing and mind control. It was like a Hollywood obsession. Well, one important thing to note is that, Hollywood is like the CIA's subconscious, right? And that's a weird thing. It doesn't even make any sense. But if something's all over the Hollywood movies, it's generally what American intelligence is doing. And that is a really weird thing, but it's because Hollywood and the U.S. intelligence agencies so closely coordinate. You can almost keep track of what the CIA is thinking, not directly, what the CIA is dreaming by watching Hollywood movies. And that's a really weird thing. But it's a good rule. For example, right? We remember that Maria Butina, right, was a woman, a Russian woman that they abducted, and they arrested her, and they accused her of being a foreign lobbyist because she was married to or she wasn't even married. She was dating an NRA guy. They tortured her. It was horrible. This Russian woman, Maria Butina. Well, before they did it, before they grabbed this Russian woman and made this crazy media story about how Russia is secretly involved in the NRA and all this, before they did that, they made a Hollywood movie called Red Sparrow, right? So before they made up the propaganda story and arrested Maria Butina, they made a Hollywood propaganda film called Red Sparrow. And the same for Victor Bout, right? Victor Bout was an arms dealer, a Russian guy who sold weapons, and they abducted him from Thailand, and they held him in a prison for years away from his wife and kids. But before they did that, they made this crazy Hollywood movie that has absolutely nothing to do with what really happened in his case, called Merchant of Death, right? And it's and a lot of times what the CIA is thinking leaks out in movies. And that's a really weird thing. It's not that the movies are true. It's that the CIA is dreaming up, what they're planning, and the people dreaming it up and the people advising Hollywood studios on what movies they're going to make work together. Right? There was a James Bond movie that came out a few years ago where the villain is clearly Julian Assange, and he looks like Julian Assange, and he's a hacker who releases stuff. I think it's Skyfall. And it's like at the same time the CIA is thinking, how do we stop Julian Assange? They make a movie where Julian Assange is the bad guy, right? This is the kind of thing that happens. Hollywood and American intelligence are linked, right? It's not a direct correlation, but, you know, it's been revealed that at one point, every major Hollywood studio had a CIA guy on the board of it. Somebody was reporting back to the CIA, and, you know, that Hollywood has relationships with the military. And there's a lot of documentation of Hollywood and the military working together. And so because of that, Hollywood became obsessed with brainwashing and was making all kinds of movies about brainwashing. Well, surprise, surprise, the CIA was also obsessed with brainwashing. And there are a number of books about Project MKUltra, but the two big books that are public that have come out, that have been out for years. The big one that came out in the 70s is called The Search for the Manchurian Candidate. It's after that book, the book and movie, The Manchurian Candidate. Search for the Manchurian Candidate by John D. March, The CIA and Mind Control. This is the first major book on MKUltra. And then more recently, there's this book, The Poisoner in Chief, and it's Stephen Kinzer's biography of Sidney Gottlieb. And then there's Tom O'Neill, who you heard in the interview, has this new book about Charles Manson and the CIA and Charles Manson's connections to MKUltra. But those are the big books. And Stephen Kinzer in Poisoner in Chief, which is the more recent book. Sidney Gottlieb was the director of the program. This is like a biography of Sidney Gottlieb, who was the director of MKUltra. He writes, the two traumatic historical episodes, the testimony of Cardinal Mindszenty during his 1949 trial in Hungary and the behavior of American prisoners in Korea several years later, convinced senior CIA officers that communists had discovered the key to mind control. So it was 1949. There was a Catholic cardinal named Mindszenty who had been a Nazi collaborator and was an anti-communist. And he had worked with Hitler in Hungary, and he said the communists are the main threat. And there, unfortunately, I mean, this is no offense to Catholics, because there were many Catholic priests who rescued Jews that were, you know, and saved them from the gas chambers. There were many Catholic priests that were, you know, were working against fascism. But there was a layer of Catholic priests, especially in Italy and in Spain and in Germany, that collaborated. In Hungary, one of the Nazi collaborating priests was Cardinal Mindszenty. And Cardinal Mindszenty was arrested by the communist government in Hungary. And at his trial, he got up and confessed to everything. And people were blown away by his testimony, because he got up and, you know, he said, basically, I'm guilty. I worked with the Nazis. I've been trying to overthrow the communist government in coordination with the CIA. You know, and he confessed to everything, and everyone was horrified by it. I mean, it was horrifying. And they said, well, he must have been brainwashed. I mean, how could this possibly be? And then obviously what happened with the Korean War, you know, POWs years later. The stories they imbibed as children and adults made those fears seem real. Lost in the blurry borderland between fantasy and truth of mind control, they could not bring themselves to recognize the fantasy as the product of creative imagination. What the imagination could conceive, they believed the clandestine world could make real. MKUltra was an attempt to invent a new reality. Basically, the CIA was convinced that they could make horror movies come true, right? There's a film from the 1920s, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. It's 1920s kind of expressionist German film about this hypnosis doctor who, you know, hypnotizes people and uses them to kill people. And, you know, hypnosis is a theme in a lot of movies and science fiction. And basically the CIA was convinced that China had developed some kind of, you know, voodoo, some kind of magic through which they could control people's minds, and they were going to figure out what it was. That was the beginning of Project MKUltra, right? Now, they did a whole lot of crazy stuff. And the book, The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, you know, that was the first major book, right? 1977, you had the Church Committee of the U.S. Congress during Jimmy Carter's presidency, where they acknowledged and revealed a lot of what went on. And in The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, they described some of what went on. One thing that they did was there was this drug called LSD, lysergic acid dilithiamide, right? LSD, acid, right? very popular hallucinogen. Well, the reason it's a popular hallucinogen is the CIA started distributing it. It was discovered in the 1930s by a scientist named Albert Hofmann, but not really much came of it. It was just, this pill that some pharmacologist had discovered. Oh, if you take it, it makes you hallucinate. The story is that Albert Hofmann was he rode a bicycle to work every day, and that he rode his bicycle next to the railroad tracks. And one day he took some of this new drug that was like a blood pressure drug or something called LSD to see what it would do. And he was riding his bicycle and right next to the railroad tracks, and he looked over, and all of a sudden the railroad tracks were going up to heaven. And he said, something's not right here. And that was because LSD was causing him to hallucinate. And not really much had come of it. But in the 1950s, the CIA started experimenting with LSD to see if they could use LSD as mind control. And they launched what they called Operation Midnight Climax, which is they went to San Francisco and they found a brothel where there were prostitutes. And they figured that going to a brothel is not something people are generally proud to do. So they figured people who go to brothels are not likely to go around telling people that they did that. So they went to this brothel and they had the prostitutes chain guys to beds and put them on LSD. And then chained to the bed, the guys would, they would study the effects that LSD had on the guys in the brothel. And they did that. They also they did even weirder things. They would go into an area of San Francisco, and they would just put acid in every person's drink to see what would happen. And they were experimenting to see if LSD could have a military value, right? If they were, before you bomb or invade an area, if you send a bunch of guys in to stick LSD in everyone's drink and everyone starts tripping, will that help you cause enough confusion when you invade? Will it work? And they were using the drug LSD to see what it could do. And they were going to college campuses and they were paying college students to take LSD and tell them what the experience was like. And that's how 1960s drug culture really got going, is that college campuses, right, were, there was a lot of young people going to college. College was very cheap back then. And part of post-World War II America was that, getting a college education was suddenly way more accessible than it had been previously. It was quite hard to go to college prior to World War II. But after World War II, college was very cheap, and they were encouraging a lot of people to go to college. And, 1950s and 60s America, it was quite easy to go to a public university. So on the public universities, they'd say, hey, we'll pay you, a little bit of money. Just come here and take this pill and tell us what happens. Well, that pill was LSD. And there were a number of people who took the pill and liked it so much, they said, I want to get some of this pill on the side. And they found somebody who would sell them that pill. And that's how 1960s drug culture began. And Dr. Timothy Leary, who became the big drug guru, the big hippie drug guru, he was a psychiatrist at Harvard University. And they, it was part of the MKUltra program. They were giving college kids and professors LSD. And he started taking LSD as part of the, the studies they were doing at Harvard, and he got into it. And this was going on with prisoners as well. And we'll talk more about that later. But in the federal prisons, they would take prisoners and say, hey, we're going to give you this drug and see what it does to you. Prisoners and college kids were basically turned into lab rats. Now, another thing that they did is Project MKUltra, which I think is interesting. And this is quoted in Search for the Manchurian Candidate. They quote a CIA source that's saying, with gang warfare, you tried to get some defectors in place who would like to modify some of the group behavior and cool it. Now, getting a juvenile delinquent defector was motivationally not that different from getting a Soviet one. So basically, and this is interesting. So you take a street gang, right? You have a group of young kids that are, a gang robbing people, committing petty thefts, selling drugs or whatever. And you get one of them who gets caught, who quits the gang. And he says, I'm done with this. And he starts telling on all his gang brothers and saying, oh, this guy's doing this. And instead of, having him testify against them, they say, what we're going to do is we're going to send you back into the gang. We're going to send you back into the gang. And we're going to try and see if having you as a plant in the gang can change the gang's behavior. And that was a big part of Project MKUltra, was when somebody quits a gang, don't have them, turn against the gang, have them go back into the gang and manipulate it from within. And according to the CIA, that was what they did, not only with gangs, they studied doing it with criminal organizations and organized crime and gangs. And they figured out how to do that with the Soviet government, because that was true. That happened. There'd be a lot of people, there was a lot of people on the American side, famously during the Cold War, who switched sides, right? There were CIA operatives like Philip Agee, ran away to Cuba and announced that he was on the other side. Well, there were people from the Soviet Union who did that, who said, I'm against the Soviet government, and went over to the American side. And the Americans would say, don't turn against communism, go back into the Soviet Union, but manipulate it from within, right? And the idea is that rather than face your enemy head on, you want to manipulate your enemy from within. And that's a big theme that we're going to talk about. So that was one thing, as they started doing these experiments with criminals, with young criminals, gang members, getting them to go back into their gangs and manipulate their gangs from within. Now, right there, that kind of raises an alarm about legality, right? Because if the CIA is planting people in gangs, right? If some kid is part of a gang, or somebody's involved in the mafia, and they quit and they go to the cops and they say, all right, I'm done with this. And the cops say, no, go back in, but be our guy inside the group. Doesn't that make the cops complicit in criminal behavior? Yeah. And in order for that to work, there have to be crimes that the cops know about that they don't stop. Think about it, right? If it's a drug dealing gang and they plant a guy in it, they can't have the very next time they go deal drugs, they arrest everybody. Well, no, there's got to be a lot of criminal activity that the government knows about and isn't stopping, right? And so right there, that's raising very big ethical questions, right? If you're planting people, if people are trying to quit gangs, and then you're turning them into agents, people are trying to defect from a gang, and you're turning them into agents and sending them back in, that kind of means you're enabling some of what the gang does, right? So that already is raising legal and ethical questions, right? The other thing that they did is they apparently, and this is horrifying, is they picked people, and they would, try to drive them over the edge into insanity. And one of the CIA sources for this book, The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, describes this in his book, in the book. This is in the book. He says, quote, "That's why I couldn't even take reading the files after a while. I was sickened at seeing people take pleasure in other people's inadequacies. First of all, it was dumb. For all the money that went out, nothing ever came back. First, you'd check to see if you could destroy a man's marriage. If you could, that would be enough to put a lot of stress on the individual and break him down. Then you might start a minor rumor campaign against him, harass him constantly, bump his car in traffic. A lot of it is ridiculous, but it may have a cumulative effect." So they would basically pick somebody as a target, and try to make them go crazy and just see what they could do. One of the targets was Paul Robeson. Do people know Paul Robeson? Paul Robeson was an amazing musician, an athlete, a civil rights activist who was a communist sympathizer. Paul Robeson, an African-American leader. Well, the CIA, when he was in Russia, in the Soviet Union, they put acid into his drinks, and they dosed him with LSD to try and make him have a psychotic break. It was a really nasty thing. You can read about what they did to Paul Robeson, and they thought, hey, if we can make Paul Robeson have a psychotic break, everyone will just think, oh, look, well, we don't have to listen to what he says about communism because clearly he's just a nut anyway. It's a really nasty thing to do, and they put acid in his drinks. And there were other targets that they had, and it was like kind of a game. It's like, how can we push someone over the edge? How can we stress somebody else enough, destroy their marriage, start a rumor against them, have them have a car accident, and we'll just see what it takes to just carefully make someone go crazy. Isn't that evil? Isn't that evil? And like the CIA agent that's quoted by John D. Marks actually says, I was sickened by the whole thing. I mean, it takes a really sick person to, to kind of do this and to just kind of have fun driving other people crazy and such. But there you go. So then that brings us to William Sargent. William Sargent. There he is, British psychiatrist. He was a psychiatrist in Britain and in Canada and in Australia, and all, those are all, British Commonwealth countries. And he was doing mind control experiments for British intelligence. And he became quite famous during the 1960s as just kind of an expert on mind control. And he published 2 little best-selling paperback books, which I have here. I have, I keep them in a plastic bag because it's like paperback books are very vulnerable. But, he published The Battle for the Mind by William Sargent and The Mind Possessed, right? And he published these books, and he was just treated as, he's just an expert. And he was quoted in a lot of the media as an expert on brainwashing and all of that. Well, we now know he was a little bit more than that. He was a pretty evil dude, actually. Paul knows what I'm about to say here. He did sleep experiments where he kept people drugged asleep for months, while he tried to plant ideas in their heads while they were sleeping, right? The idea is that someone would be asleep for months, but then while they're asleep, there'd be a recording of a voice saying, the sky is actually red. 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 And the idea is then if after months of being asleep with a voice saying the sky is actually red, the sky is actually red, if you wake up and they say, I'm glad you had a nice sleep. Now tell me, what color was the sky? Well, actually, the sky is actually red. Aha, success, right? I mean, it's like, these are like evil experiments. And it's now been declassified that there were multiple people who never woke up that died. And there were at least a couple people who died from his sleep experiments. We don't know how many. There's no public record of how many people he killed. But these were people who were just mental hospital patients, people that had some kind of serious mental illness. And they were, in a hospital, and without their permission, without their consent, this guy who was actually a British intelligence officer kept them asleep for months while he tried to plant ideas in their heads and brainwash them. Really, really evil shit, William Sargent. And there's BBC interviews with victims of his, right? Who survived, thank goodness. But I mean, this is some pretty evil shit the US government was doing, and that British intelligence and American intelligence were sharing information. And this was part of MKUltra. And so we have those 2 books he wrote. But if you read the 2 books, I have read them. Basically, he says that brainwashing is just manipulation of the natural, healthy human impulse to match your environment and fit in. Basically, and this is the reality, is human beings want to get along with the people they're around. And, if you're around a group of people that act a certain way, you're going to start acting a certain way. If the people you're around all use certain phrases, you're going to start using those certain phrases. If all the people you're around start walking in a certain way, you're going to walk that way. It's a very natural part of the human mind, is that we adapt to the other humans that we are around, right? And that we are, the way we think of ourselves is the way people react to us. If people react to us positively, we tend to have high self-esteem. If people react to us negatively, we have negative self-esteem. That we human beings are collective creatures. Even thousands of years ago, when we were hunter-gatherers, we were always in tribes, right? And who you're around is how you judge yourself, right? And you are a product of who you're around. That's another thing to keep in mind, right? That if you want to be a highly successful person, surround yourself with highly successful people. If you want to be a criminal, surround yourself with criminals. If you want to, if you want to be a failure, surround yourself with failures, right? If you want to be highly, caring, surround yourself with highly caring people. You are a product of the people you interact with. That's an important thing to keep in mind. And basically, brainwashing is just an element of that, right? It's just kind of manipulation of this natural impulse we have to do what the people around us do. He says suggestibility is in fact one essential characteristic of being normal. A normal person is responsive to other people around him and cares what they think of him and is readily open to their suggestion and influence. And it gets more interesting because he says the schizophrenic and schizoid thinker is the most immune of all to outside influences dominating his ideas. His ideas come most often from inside himself, and may be the product of hallucinations, delusions, and other abnormal thought processes which he experiences, which he tries to explain on the basis of further delusional thinking. During the war, schizophrenics were rarely upset by bombing, for instance, being far too preoccupied with their own inner turmoils and worries. So basically what he's saying is the more healthy you are psychologically, the easier it is to brainwash you. And the people that you cannot brainwash are crazy people, people that are schizophrenic, people that are psychotic. You can't brainwash them because they're not listening to you. They're in their own little world. But brainwashing is just manipulation of people's basic impulse to fit in. And that people that are schizophrenic, that homeless person on the street that you see talking to themselves, you can't brainwash them because they're not paying attention to you. They're in their own little world. And when people become psychotic, they're kind of disconnected from the world outside of them. So they can't be brainwashed because they're doing this. And that even when bombs were going off in World War II, right, in the mental hospitals in Britain, there'd be bombs going off. And these people in mental hospitals that were schizophrenic were too busy talking to the voices in their head. They didn't even notice that bombs were going off, right? And that's the thing, is that brainwashing is not mental illness. It's the opposite. It's a manipulation of mental healthiness. Mental health is getting along with other people, being able to conform to the group, hearing what other people say and learning from it, adjusting your own habits to fit in with other people. That's what normal, healthy people do, is they adjust to their environment. And brainwashing and suggestibility is fitting in with your environment. And mentally ill people are people that can't do that. Very interesting. Kind of doesn't match what we're taught. It also goes on to say, persons of hysterical temperament are highly suggestible. Hysterical behavior is most commonly the result of normal people breaking down under severe stresses, as is seen again and again during the war. Faith healing and spirit possession rarely happen in calm, rational atmospheres, as every witch doctor and faith healer knows all too well. Emotions must be aroused for success to be obtained. So basically, when people become, suggestible is when they're under a high amount of stress, right? And that's basically, it's like your child instincts catch in, right? When a child is in danger, it follows mommy and daddy, right? It's like, I'm in danger. I need to just follow the leader, right? And so when people are scared, that's when they tend to obey and follow the rules and go along with the herd. Great example is after 9/11. After 9/11, when the Twin Towers came down and many people, were fearing for their lives, many people blindly stepped behind George W. Bush in the war on terror because they feared for their safety. Well, they were in a high state of stress, and that made them more suggestible, right? And I mean, that's a reality also, is when people are afraid, when people are worked up and stressed out, they're more likely to obey and they're more likely to conform to the herd. Whereas when people are not stressed out, when people are more, chill or whatever, well, then they're going to question things a little bit more. But when people are stressed out, and this crisis government, and that's what Naomi Klein talks about in her book, The Shock Doctrine. Right? Is that, that often it's when there's a crisis in society, that's when they ram all kinds of neoliberal economic reforms down our throats, because people aren't going to question it because they're panicking, right? And whether it's after 9/11 or the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, that when people are worked up and upset, that's when they tend to conform and be more suggestible, right? That's what he's telling, right? But the most interesting thing that comes out of Search for the Manchurian Candidate is lassitude. And this is something I talk about in my book, The Danger of an American Years of Lead. And this is a quote from the book. It says, this CIA veteran describes all the colors of the rainbow growing out of the cracks of the sidewalk. He had always disliked the cracks as a sign of imperfection, but suddenly the crack became natural stress lines that measured the vibrations of the universe. This is a CIA officer on LSD. Right? A CIA officer who's always been annoyed by cracks on the sidewalk. They give him LSD, and suddenly the crack becomes a natural stress line that measures the vibrations of the universe, man. All the colors of the rainbow are coming out of the cracks, brother. It's amazing. Right? The CIA official states, you tend to have a more global view of things. I found it awfully hard when stoned to maintain the notion that I am a U.S. citizen, my country, right or wrong. You tend to have good feelings. You're more open to brotherhood of man idea. You're more susceptible to the seamy sides of your own society. And this is quoting the CIA officer. I think that's what happened in the 1960s. It didn't make people more communist. It just made them less inclined to identify with the U.S. They took a plague on both your houses position. Now, what's that? Well, basically that when people are stoned, they don't care. They don't feel fired up. They don't feel passionate anymore. They just feel like, hey, it's all a matter of opinion. There's two sides to every story, man. Who cares? Just got to chill. Got to get stoned, brother. Right? I mean, if you've been around stoners, you know what I'm talking about. Are they going to get fired up about anything? No. So basically, what did they discover? Well, passionate people or true believers flip. And that's what happened in the Korean War camps. These guys who were American soldiers, they were the biggest true believers in America that ever existed, right? They thought America could do no wrong. The commies were pure evil. America is pure good, and the commies are pure evil. And all it took was to get them into a highly stressful situation of getting captured as a prisoner of war in the middle of a war. And then they would just show them, hey, here's what the American government does to black people, lynchings. That's commie propaganda. I don't believe that. Well, here's the New York Times saying it. Here's mainstream sources. And under stress and having this blind, true believer attitude that America could do no wrong, well, they'd flip. Right? And they would become communists. And that the people who didn't flip in the Korean War camps were the people that were cynical. All right? If people are really, really passionate, dedicated anti-communists, it's very possible that if they're put under a lot of stress and they go through some kind of personal crisis, they could become a communist. Right? If people are very, very fanatical Muslims, it's very possible that if they're stressed and they're put into a crisis situation, they could become very anti-Islamic. Right? If people are very, 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 very Christian and they get stressed out, it's very possible that under the right circumstances, they could become very, very anti-Christian. Right? And that true believers can flip. However, cynical people lose their passion and can become indifferent. And that's the other dirty secret of all of this, right? Is that if those guys, the guys who didn't become communists in the camps, were the people who already knew about Jim Crow segregation, who already knew about the lynchings, who already knew some of the communist side of the story. And the communists would come at them and say, America does evil things. And they'd say, yeah, but you guys do bad things too. And they wouldn't flip. Right. And that, a lot of the CIA propaganda that comes out, especially in the late 50s, after the downfall of Joe McCarthy, after the death of Stalin, books like Eric Hoffer's True Believer, a lot of it is saying that there's a real danger of people being passionate and believing in things, because if people are passionate and believe in things, they can flip. And that's the fear. And that cynical people who think, the world's fucked up, everybody's bad, they just become indifferent. And that if you get people on drugs, what is the reality? You're more open to a brotherhood of man idea. You're susceptible to the seamy sides of your own society. It didn't make people more communist. They just didn't identify with the U.S. anymore. They took a plague on both your houses position, right? That if you get people on drugs kill their passion. You get people on acid and they're seeing rainbows come out of the cracks in the sidewalk. And well, America's wrong. Communists are wrong, man. I just want to get stoned. I just want to chill, brother. It's much more effective. And that rather than trying to foment fanatical anti-communism, it was better to get people into a state of lassitude. And that's what the CIA discovered. And that's what the new left was about. Rather than have the American government preach fanatical anti-communism, they created the new left, which was anti-authoritarianism. Rather than have art demonizing evil communism to counter social realism, they fund abstract art and Jackson Pollock and just splattering paint on a canvas. That's freedom, man. We're not trying to push any agenda, right? And that abstract art was funded by the CIA during these years. As was experimental music, as were many, many things, right? You know, there was a huge, huge, huge effort to get people into a state of mind, where they would just be indifferent, and distributing drugs everywhere and funding abstract art. And all of that was a great way to do it. And that all leads to a school of thought called postmodernism. What is postmodernism? Postmodernism, and I cannot tell you how annoying it is to hear Jordan Peters say the postmodern neo-Marxists. Postmodernism and Marxism are opposites. Postmodernism is an ideology that says there are no grand narratives to explain human history. Marxism is an ideology that puts forward a grand narrative to explain human history. It's called historical materialism. First, there's hunter-gatherers, then there's slavery, then feudalism, then capitalism, and eventually socialism, and eventually communism. Marxism is a grand narrative to explain human history. Postmodernism is the idea that there is no grand narrative to explain human history, and that anyone who tries to give you a grand narrative to explain human history is totalitarian. And postmodernism, Derrida, all of this is saying that the only thing you can do is engage in deconstruction. That any attempt to give a grand narrative to explain history, any attempt to tell people what's right and what's wrong, any attempt to give people a truth to struggle for and believe in, that's totalitarianism. And instead, the only good thing you can do is take things apart. Take things apart. Deconstruct. And postmodernists use Marxism because Marxism deconstructs a lot of things. For example, right, we have the traditional family, right? The nuclear family, mom and dad and, 2.5 children, right? Well, Marxism says, actually, if you go back a couple thousand years ago, men had more than one wife. And that was really, really common. And if you go back even further, in hunter-gatherer civilization, there really was no formal institution of marriage, and they didn't keep track of whose kid was whose, right? And so this idea that the family is just this eternal thing that's always been around, well, that's not actually true. I remember when I was a kid, I grew up in a small town. At the time, gay marriage was being hotly debated. And there was a bumper sticker people in my town used to have. And it would say, marriage equals one man plus one woman. And then it would have a verse from the Bible. And I used to ask people, because I was an obnoxious teenage atheist, I would say to them, really, how many wives did Abraham have? How many wives did Moses have? How many wives did Ezekiel have? Because you're saying the Bible says marriage equals one man plus one woman, not the Old Testament. The Old Testament doesn't say that. In fact, the Old Testament says it is your job. If your brother dies, you must take on his wife as an additional wife. And actually, there's places all over the Bible, at least all over the Old Testament, that it says you not only can you have more than one wife, that you should have more than one wife. Read the book of Leviticus, right? In fact, there's a guy in the Old Testament who his brother dies, and he marries his brother's wife, which is his obligation, but he doesn't want to impregnate her. So he spilleth his seed upon the ground, and God kills him for it, because that's a sin, because it's his obligation to impregnate his brother's wife. The Old Testament pretty strongly believes in polygamy. So you got this bumper sticker that says, marriage is one man plus one woman. Well, that's not how it's always been. And the Bible, there's plenty of parts of the Bible that don't say that. Now, when you get into the New Testament is pretty clearly advocating monogamy. But this idea that there's one sacred way the family has already been, the way the family was in Old Testament times is not the way the family was in the New Testament. And the way it was in prehistory, before the institution of marriage was even created, was different. So Marxism, if you read The Origin of the Family, Private Property and the State by Frederick Engels, Marxism deconstructs the myth of the sacred eternal family. And it says, no, there's not a sacred eternal family. It changes based on the way the means of production change. So Marxism is useful to those who engage in deconstruction. But Marxism is not a deconstruction. It's saying, well, we can explain the way the family changes because the family and the state, all these things change, that there's base and superstructure. The economic system is the base, and as a result, the superstructure of society changes, right? And that's all that Marxism. So it's useful in deconstructing, right? Also, right, if you live in America, especially in the 1950s and 60s, you were taught America is the greatest country in the world. It's never done anything wrong. Well, you know, Marxism says American imperialism. What about the Native Americans? What about slavery? So you're deconstructing the narrative of American imperialism. Again, that's useful. But postmodernism says all you can do is deconstruct, that deconstruction is the only morality. And any attempt to create a grand narrative is totalitarianism. That's postmodernism. So postmodernism uses Marxism, but it's inherently opposite of Marxism in that Marxism says maybe the grand narratives of our society are wrong, but we're going to replace them with our grand narrative, historical materialism. Postmodernism says there is no grand narrative, and if someone tries to give you a grand narrative, they're brainwashing you, they're mind controlling you. It's deconstruction. It's about inducing lassitude. It's about preventing you from being a passionate true believer who might flip into becoming a revolutionary. And the idea is to get you into a state of lassitude, a cynical plague on both your houses state. And if they can get you drugged up, they can do that. And this is MKUltra. They discovered all of this with MKUltra. So how does this influence Cold War strategy? Right? And I haven't even gotten to the new revelations yet. We're just talking about what we already know. So far, I'm just telling you stuff that we already know from this. There are a couple new revelations, and I will get to that soon. But right now, you read Poisoner in Chief, you read Search for the Manchurian Candidate, you read William Sargent. This is the stuff that we already know, right? So what do we know? Well, the gang thing, where somebody quits a gang and then they send them back in. They did that to the Communist Party USA, and his name was Morris Childs. Morris Childs. Maybe I'll pull up an image of him. This guy, Morris Childs, it's a really ugly story. And I see, you know, a friend of mine, Lady Ravenhair, who's in the chat, knows this story very well. She probably knows some people who watched it happen over the years ago in the Communist Party. It's a really, really sad and ugly story. And there's many layers of how evil the FBI is. But basically, this guy, Morris Childs, here, I'm trying to pull up his picture. Morris Childs was a prominent communist. He lived in New York City. This guy, he was in the Communist Party of the United States. And he didn't get along. He had a fight. They kicked him out. He didn't get along with somebody. I think he quit. He quit the Communist Party. And he quit the Communist Party. He had a falling out, whatever. So then his older brother got cancer. It's so sad. His older brother got cancer, and they had huge medical bills, and he was worried about paying his brother's medical bills. This is so sad. So the FBI went to him and they said, hey, we'll cover your brother's medical bills if you'll go back into the Communist Party as our agent. And so Morris Childs went back into the Communist Party, and he went back into the Communist Party, and he ended up on the national board of the Communist Party. And in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan gave him the Presidential Medal of Freedom because he was the top FBI informant in the Communist Party. And Ronald Reagan gave him the Presidential Medal of Freedom for doing it because he did such a good job being an FBI informant. And what's really interesting is that Gus Hall, the leader of the Communist Party, insisted Morris Childs was not actually an FBI informant until his deathbed, which is very strange. So there's probably more to this story than we know. But the official story of Operation Solo, it's called, is that Morris Childs was an FBI informant, was on the national board of the Communist Party, right? And this is that thing about, this is somebody who had quit the Communist Party, and they, had a falling out, was angry, and they said, go back in as our agent. The other thing is that there were the reformed communists in the Eastern Bloc. A number of the children of the party elite, their parents were prominent leaders of the Communist Party, right? They were some of the most privileged people in Soviet society in the Eastern Bloc. a lot of them, they really liked rock and roll music and they really liked blue jeans and all of that. And they wanted to be Western. And the CIA said, don't just turn against communism. Go back into the Eastern Bloc and be a reformed communist. Be the reformist wing of communism. And Gorbachev comes out of that, right? And the idea was, to have agents within the Eastern Bloc, agents within the Soviet Union that could be manipulated, right? And that Gorbachev, eventually the guy who brought down the Soviet Union, was one of these people. He was somebody who probably had originally turned against, the Soviet, state. And they said, don't be against it, go into it and manipulate it. And that was going on. Right. The other thing is that, they talk about the rally around the flag effect and avoiding direct confrontation. I think, was it Venezuela? I think it was Venezuela. So Richard Nixon was the vice president of the United States under Eisenhower. And he was not very popular. But in 1958, as the vice president of Venezuela, Richard Nixon went to Venezuela as a diplomatic visit, and people threw eggs at his car. There were a lot of angry Venezuelan leftists, and they threw eggs and they pelted his motorcade with eggs. And then all of a sudden, Americans took that personally. How dare they disrespect our leader? How dare they disrespect our president? And Nixon became very, very popular all of a sudden because Americans wanted to stand by their guy. Nobody likes it, right? It's kind of like, they compare it like parents, right? Parents can be awful and abusive to their kids. But if they see somebody else bullying their kid, keep your hands off my kid. That's my property, right? Right. And that a lot of things like this go on, that like, it's one thing, that, and it's funny, it's not even true now, right? Nowadays, if Donald Trump went to some other country and people protested him, we wouldn't care. But back then, Americans had this kind of patriotism, and a lot of Americans who hated Richard Nixon, the second he was in Venezuela and people were throwing eggs at his motorcade, they're like, how dare you? That's America. And they loved him, right? And that often if you attack a country, if America attacks a country, often people that are, critical of the government, wouldn't generally support the government, will rally around their country. And we see this in Iran, for example, right? There's a video that went viral of a young woman who was an anti-government activist in Iran. And after Trump murdered the supreme leader, she put a headscarf on and she started crying and she apologized to the supreme leader because she's Iranian and that's her leader that they killed, right? And even if she doesn't agree with him, she doesn't approve of America kicking them around. It's called the rally round the flag effect, right? That when people see their country being attacked, they don't really like it. And because they don't really like it, they tend to, lockstep behind the government. So if you want to overthrow a country, you don't directly attack it because that'll have the opposite effect. You instead play a manipulation game, right? You try to manipulate the country from within. And that, this applies to interpersonal relationships as well. And that Dale Carnegie, there's a very famous book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's written by a self-help guy named Dale Carnegie. And Dale Carnegie, he tells a story in that book, and it's a true story. He actually cites it, that there was a guy who worked for a construction company. And the construction company required all the guys on the construction site to wear hard hats on their head for head protection. And so this guy was in charge of making sure everyone wore their hard hats. So he walked around and, and if somebody wasn't wearing their hard hat, he yelled at them, you better put your hard hat on. And he scolded them, gave them a disciplinary write-up, but people still wouldn't wear their hard hats. So then he tried a new strategy. The guy would go to the construction site, and if he saw somebody not wearing their hard hat, he would say to them, is the hat comfortable enough? He would say to them, oh, I see you're not wearing your hat. Is it comfortable enough? And he would say, is there enough padding in your hat? We really want the hats to be comfortable because we want you guys to wear them because we really don't want anyone to get hurt. Our company's like a family, and we would not want you to get hurt in an accident. And when he did it that way, people started wearing their hard hats. That if you make it a confrontation, people's response when they feel like they're being attacked is to push back. But if you make it not a confrontation, people respond differently. And that intelligence is largely the art not of directly attacking a country, but of manipulating a country from within and playing this game. Whereas, you know, the military, they directly attack. The intelligence agencies suck up to some people and make friends, and they're playing a long manipulative game. And part of that game is not engaging in a straight up confrontation. It's, you know, picking, if you're attacking a country, you pick some leaders in the country that are the good ones, that are sensible, and some that are bad. Or, you know, we like this aspect of the country, and you know, or you know, I mean, USAID is a great example of that. All over the world, including countries like Cuba and countries like Iran, etc. You know, what do? They go in and they say, "Oh, we're just setting up a healthcare clinic. You know, we're just setting up an art gallery. We're just helping." You know, and that this kind of USAID, this kind of soft power manipulation, is part of the game, right? That it's better to not look like you're attacking. And how does this translate? Well, I've quoted on here many times in the writings of Frank Kitson, and the you know, British counterinsurgency expert, and also in the writings of William S. Lind, the Pentagon strategist. They talk about how you know, the story of David and Goliath has been told for thousands of years. Nobody ever sympathizes with Goliath. People always sympathize with David. So if you want to defeat an insurgency, you don't have David fight Goliath, because even if Goliath wins, everyone's still going to sympathize with David. What you do is you have Goliath stand back, and you create 6 or 7 different Davids that fight each other. And it's very confusing, and nobody knows who's on what side. And as a result, Goliath just kind of wins by default. And Goliath doesn't look so bad. He's not hurting anybody. He may be big and tall, but he's nice, right? And it's just these Davids just can't get along. That's the art of counterinsurgency, right? You don't want a direct confrontation between David and Goliath. You just want to confuse, demoralize, and manipulate your opposition. And there's an interesting case, Freddie Scappaticci. And he was the head of the IRA's internal security division during the Troubles in Northern Ireland in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Freddie Scappaticci he called himself Steak Knife. That was his nickname. And he was the guy in the IRA whose job it was to kill people that were believed to be informants. That's basically what he was. He was the IRA guy who killed IRA guys who were thought to be traitors. And he was recruited by British intelligence. Pretty wild. You know, and there's different theories about how they got him, and you can read, there's a whole biography of him. But basically, they recruited the head of the IRA's informant catching division. And what they did was they used Freddie to kill IRA leaders that the British thought they couldn't control. And that basically the British said, we want the IRA to be headed by people whose behavior we can predict. And Gerry Adams, is now like the leader of Irish republicanism, who signed the Good Friday Agreement. Gerry Adams, right? He was picked. The British said, this is a guy who we can control. And so Freddie Steak Knife didn't kill Gerry Adams and accuse him of being a spy, but he killed many other leaders of the IRA who were legitimate Irish Republicans. And the idea was that the British wanted the IRA to be headed by leaders that they could control. And that's really a crazy story. But basically, the British decided that what we're going to do is we're going to pick who runs the IRA. And we're not going to pick agents to run the IRA. We're going to pick people whose behavior we can predict and control. And this is one of the wild things. And this is, now we're going to get to the new revelations. What are the new revelations, right? Well, the guy who testified that you saw in the video was Tom O'Neill. And he's the author of this new book about Charles Manson, right? And that basically all they did in these MKUltra hearings was basically reveal what he revealed in his book, confirmed what Tom O'Neill wrote in his book. Tom O'Neill, investigative journalist. He spent years working on this book. It's a good book. I recommend you read it. It's a good book. I'll put it on the screen. I've read it. It doesn't have that much information in it, but it does really take apart the Charles Manson case. The Charles Manson murder case, right? Like everything we know about Charles Manson is wrong. That's really what the book should be called. It should be called Everything You Know About Charles Manson is Wrong by Tom O'Neill. And basically he describes Charles Manson's relationship to Project MKUltra, which is that the important thing to remember is that that in intelligence terminology, one becomes an asset when their behavior can be predicted. Is that you're not an asset if you know you're working for the CIA. You're not an asset if they hire you and pay you. You're an asset when they feel like they can predict your behavior. It might be because they reward you with money. It might be because they just study your behavior, and that intelligence largely consists of cultivating assets. And that Louis Jolyon West was the head military, was a psychiatrist on a U.S. Air Force base in San Antonio, Texas. Louis Jolly West. They called him Jolly West, Dr. Jolly West. And federal prisoners were taken to his hospital, and he worked on prisoners in the federal prison system throughout the 1950s and 60s. And he cooperated with Sidney Gottlieb, who was the head of the MKUltra program, and they brought him various people that were in the federal prison system, and he worked on them. And he learned to implant memories in their heads. He learned to change their personalities. But the main thing he did was he learned to predict their behavior. He learned how to get them to do what the CIA wanted them to do, right? He spent a lot of time with people, and he worked on them, and he figured out how to control their behavior. Two of those people, we now know, thanks to Tom O'Neill's book, and now the new documents confirm it. Two of the people he worked on were Charles Manson and Jack Ruby. All right, Jack Ruby is the guy who shot Lee Harvey Oswald and killed him. Charles Manson was a drug dealer in Hollywood who had a group of people who worked for him, and he murdered the famous movie star Sharon Tate and a few other people. He committed some pretty gruesome murders in Hollywood in I think 1970, 1969, around that time. And so these two people, one of them is the guy who shot Lee Harvey Oswald, the guy who was arrested for killing President Kennedy. The other was this famous, Hollywood murderer who had a little cult that killed people in Hollywood or whatever. That both of them had been worked on by Dr. Louis Jolly West. We know that. The other thing that Tom O'Neill reveals is that Reeve Whitson was a Hollywood CIA operative. This guy, Reeve Whitson, was a guy who was well known in Hollywood, and he knew Charles Manson, and he knew Sharon Tate, and he knew many, many other people. Right? That there was this guy, Reeve Whitson, who was like a photographer, right? He took pictures and whatever, but he was just a guy in Hollywood who went to all the parties, and he knew the movie stars, and he knew the producers, and he knew Charles Manson. Right? Charles Manson and his followers lived on a Hollywood movie set, right? There was the Ranch, they called it, which was a Hollywood movie set that they used to film, Hollywood Western movies. Charles Manson and his little group of followers, most of whom were women, but there were a few men. It was a small group. It was like 13 people or something. They lived for free on this ranch that was a Hollywood movie set. And they just lived there, and they dealt drugs. They sold drugs, and it was a drug dealing group. People talk about the Charles Manson thing as being an example of a cult. That's a little bit of an exaggeration. The Charles Manson thing is really, it's just some kind of evil, it's like a horror movie. It's basically, there were largely a number of women who were addicted to drugs. Charles Manson was a drug dealer. And he used the fact that they were addicted to drugs to have power over them, basically. And that's something that, there's probably a Charles Manson in every major city. There's probably 5 or 6 of them, right? That's something drug dealers do all the time, is they get women hooked to drugs, and they use the fact that they're addicted to drugs to control them and make them their sex slaves, basically. It's a pretty evil thing, but it happens. It's really not that uncommon. That's what Charles Manson was. Charles Manson was, a juvenile delinquent, a lifelong habitual criminal. And in prison, they had done, LSD experiments on him. He got out of prison. And after he was out of prison, he was doing, he had a steady access to LSD and other drugs. and he had a group of people that he was giving drugs to that were under his control. And Reeve Whitson knew him because Reeve Whitson knew everyone in Hollywood. And Hollywood, especially back then, Hollywood was a small town. They talk about how Hollywood was a small town. There were only 7 major studios. It wasn't a very big place. And so this Reeve Whitson guy, who was actually a CIA agent, knew everybody. He knew famous actresses. He went to all the parties. He knew everybody. And what happened was that, according to this book, by Tom O'Neill, Charles Manson didn't even know that Sharon Tate lived at the house. The house that Sharon Tate lived in was formerly inhabited by another drug dealer, right? Another drug dealer lived there, and then he had moved out, and Sharon Tate moved in. And one night, Charles Manson gathered his followers and said to them, I want you to go to this address and kill everyone in the house. They went there, and it just so happened that Sharon Tate was living there. So they went there, and they brutally murdered Sharon Tate, and the actress. Well, according to Tom O'Neill, Charles Manson did not know Sharon Tate was living there. He thought the rival drug dealer was living there. So Charles Manson thought he was going to kill a rival drug dealer and, make more money from selling drugs. And he sent his followers, and it just so happened that a famous movie star was living there, and so they brutally murdered her instead, and they arrested Charles Manson for the murders. Reeve Whitson then met with the prosecutor, and he wrote and made up this whole story about how Charles Manson thought he was the second coming of Jesus and was trying to start a race war between whites and blacks and thought Death Valley was where Satan lit. And they wrote a whole crazy, crazy, crazy story that the prosecutor wrote, and it became a best-selling book, Helter Skelter, and it was all over the media, and that the Charles Manson story is not actually true. It was written by a CIA operative to serve a political purpose, that Richard Nixon was cracking down on the Black liberation movement and cracking down on hippies and student activists. And so they needed a really scary, awful story to be in the media of an evil drug dealing hippie who murdered people and wanted to start a race war that would scare the crap out of everybody. Would scare the crap out of everybody and get them to support the crackdown on the Black Panthers and stuff like that. So basically the CIA wrote the whole story, and Reeve Whitson had known Charles Manson, and he knew Sharon Tate, and he knew everybody involved. And, it's not proven that it's not that he told Charles Manson to kill Sharon Tate. It's just that when it happened, he then went to the prosecutor and he said, this is how we're going to spin it. And the story that we all got in mainstream media, they made into movies and they've written books, and, the Helter Skelter story is complete bull honky, right? And that it all was inspired by Beatles music, right? That was another thing. It was like Beatles music, the White Album of the Beatles had caused, it was the White Album of the Beatles was the manifesto, and it was all just bull honky, right? That's what Tom O'Neill claims. Not saying he's necessarily telling the truth. I know people in the chat are contesting it, and I'm not saying I necessarily stand by this. That's what Tom O'Neill claims in his book. And basically the smoking gun that they had on Capitol Hill is that Tom O'Neill says, that Sidney Gottlieb, the head of the MKUltra program, was communicating with Charles Manson, or was communicating with Jolly West. And Jolly West was the psychiatrist who did the experiments on Charles Manson. And now basically we have documents confirming that. Yes, Jolly West, who was the Air Force psychiatrist who oversaw Charles Manson and Jack Ruby. Yes, indeed, he was involved with MKUltra. That's basically all that they revealed, right? Not a huge revelation. It was already revealed in this book. There's been suspicion of it for years, but yes, now it's confirmed. So that's basically what we know about MKUltra. So what can we take from this? Well, first of all, right, in the age of social media, right, what they were able to do back in the 60s with MKUltra and with manipulation is far, far more massive. Because, right, what is that whole story I told you about the hard hats, right? Nobody likes being told that they're wrong. Nobody likes being told that they're wrong, being told that they're bad. Nobody likes that. But one surefire way to get people to do what you want is to reward them. Nobody ever turns down an award. Think about it, right? If I walked up to you and said, I am going to give you a $500 award because I think you're so amazing, and you're going to say, get that away from me, Caleb. I don't know what you're trying to pull. I don't want your $500. I'm not awesome. Get that away. No one's going to do that, right? And this is what, How to Win Friends and Influence People, Dale Carnegie talks about. This is also what was discovered by B.F. Skinner, right? That punishing people is not persuasive. There are rare instances where, yes, somebody, commits a horrendous crime and is found guilty, and they say, you know what, I deserve the death penalty. I'm an awful person. Rarely does that happen, right? And if you go to the prisons, the most evil murderers, rapists, and axe murderers and child molesters will sit there and tell you they did nothing wrong. They did nothing wrong, and society is just out to get them. And they will do weird leaps and backflips in their own minds. They've done this, right? Some of the most evil murderers and criminals will sit there and tell you they didn't do anything wrong. Everyone's out to get them and all of that. That's something that most human beings don't want to think they're wrong. And if you punish people, people get defensive, right? If you punish somebody, they resent it. They feel they're being treated unfairly. No one likes the experience of being punished. If the punishment is very harsh, very humiliating, very degrading, people really don't like it, right? So punishment creates resentment, creates resistance. But reward is something that people will always accept. People very rarely question being rewarded. In the age of social media, folks, social media, it is so easy to manipulate people. And that's one thing we need to take from MKUltra. MKUltra is about learning to manipulate and predict people's behavior. Nowadays, right? Somebody could come on this stream right now and give me two $300 super chats. Caleb, I really, really liked the way your hair is tonight. The way your hair tonight is really, really awesome. Here's $300. Well, I like to think of myself as being self-aware. I like to think of myself as being conscious, but there's a very good chance that I would try to keep my hair like that for the next stream because that person gave me $300. But the thing is, I don't know who that person is. I don't know who they are. That could be the CIA. And it could be that serves some foreign policy goal, right? And that's why social media makes turning people into assets really fucking easy, because it's all about rewards. It's about chasing rewards. You want the likes, you want the shares, you want more views, you want more attention, you want more super chats, you need, and you're getting rewards. And you don't question where those rewards are coming from. And it's very hard to trace. Who are the people giving you support on Patreon? Who are the people, sharing your streams? Who are the people sending it in? You don't know, right? And this is a very, very effective way to manipulate people. People can be manipulated, can be nudged in ways that are much more untraceable. If somebody walks up to you and gives you $500, you at least know who they are. But in the age of social media, someone can send you a super chat, or someone can, or maybe it was just natural, right? Right. The algorithm is just natural. Maybe people just really liked it, right? People just really, really liked it, right? Right. And that's the game, right? Maybe it's not manipulation. We know there's a huge amount of algorithmic manipulation, right? I maintain the dead internet theory. I think that the overwhelming majority of likes and shares and bots on the internet are not real. I think that they are playing games. And I've talked with other people who do the same kind of anti-imperialist work that I do. And they have told me stories that, I've got even my own experiences seeing how fake the internet is. But I've talked to some other people where, they play all kinds of games. It's all rigged and it's all fake. They're manipulating it, but it's a way to control people's behavior. The other thing that is important to remember is that one of the things when you turn someone into an asset, when you're trying to control their behavior, right? When you're trying to control somebody's behavior, You have to study their personality, right? And that takes time, right? You got to sit there and say, okay, he really likes it when I say this. He doesn't like it when I do this. He really hates it when I do. It takes time. But now you don't have to have a person do it. You can have an AI bot do it. Think about that, right? You don't have to take the time to study the person and learn how to manipulate their behavior and turn them into an asset. You can have an AI bot do it. Interesting, isn't it? The other thing is placing assets in control of opposition rather than destroying opposition, right? What they did with Morris Childs. They didn't destroy the Communist Party. They said, we're going to pick the leader of the Communist Party. We're going to put our guy on the national board, and we're going to make the Communist Party ineffective, right? And that goes on. You think that doesn't go on in our spaces, you are being self-delusional. Right? You are being self-delusional. If you don't think that they play a game of, okay, there's going to have to be people on the internet that question U.S. foreign policy. Let's make sure that it's somebody who does it in a weak way. It's somebody that at the right moment we can nudge them. That's a game that goes on. Of course, that's a game. But the final point to make about all of this is that the deep state is at war with itself. They're not all on the same team. And that's what makes this even more complicated. They're not all on the same team. The deep state is at war with itself. There are different factions. There are some people in our government that really wanted the Iran nuclear deal. There are some people in our government that really didn't. There are some people in our government that would be okay with peace with Russia. There are some people in our government that are very, very opposed. And that at the same time that it is much more easy to manipulate people's behavior, there's not, especially in America, there's not one central power that's manipulating people's behavior. And that's one thing you have to remember about conspiracy narratives. The flaw in a lot of conspiracy narratives is there's one they. There's one shady group that secretly controls everything. It's not that simple, right? There are different factions that have different agendas that agree on some things and disagree on other things. And it's not just intelligence agencies that are doing this. You think Elon Musk doesn't have troll farms boosting people who support him and agree with what he's promoting and disagree? But do you think the troll farms of Elon Musk agree with the troll farms of the CIA? Do you think the troll farms of Elon Musk agree with the troll farms of Democrats? No, right? This kind of manipulating people's behavior, cultivating people as assets, controlling your own opposition, this is going on a much more widespread level than ever before. And it's much easier now with technology, but it's not all coming from the same place, right? Project MKUltra was all being done by the CIA with the cooperation of other agencies. Nowadays, what the CIA used to do by itself is being done by all kinds of different forces just within America. Now, if you think about internationally, et cetera, you can look at that. There's an element of inflation. Right? That at first, right? A dollar, is very valuable. But then if they start printing money, pretty soon a dollar isn't very, very valuable. And you got to have $10. And then if they keep printing money, pretty soon you got to have $100. There's an element of inflation in all of this, right? And that, nowadays with AI and with social media manipulation, it used to be back in the 50s and 60s, the CIA were the only people doing this. And the Soviet Union was trying to catch up with the CIA and learn how to do it. And they figured out how to do it back. But nowadays, there's loads of entities that can do MKUltra. There's loads of entities that can play this game, right? So that's the other thing to remember, right? It's not as simple, right? People that want to have a conspiracy narrative of there's the secret elite that secretly control everything. No, there's many, many different factions that are playing these games. And trying to control people and trying to pick their own opposition and trying to boost people and not know they're being manipulated and trying to turn people into assets and trying to play psychological. This is going on a much more widespread level than ever before. And it's not all coming from the same source. There's a wide variety of different sources. And that's what we need to learn about Project MKUltra. That, yes, there's a huge amount of MKUltraing going on nowadays. And that's just the way the world works. But within all of this, those of us who believe in anti-imperialism, we just have to do our best to do what's right and build the movement this country urgently needs. And just keep in mind what our enemies can do and what different forces can do. And that's that. I mean, it's really that simple, right? And that's what you can take from Project MKUltra. So I hope that that was informative. Now that that's in the news, because I covered it for my job, I thought I would go into great detail about it. Basically, that's what I understand. The book where I talk about this the most, I talk about this some in the Khrushchevism book. In the Khrushchevism book, Khrushchevism, A Study in Psychological Warfare, I talk about it. But I also talk about it in The Danger of an American Years of Lead. So if you want to read about this kind of manipulation, read Khrushchevism, A Study in Psychological Warfare. That's one of my books where I get into this. That's a good book to read. I guess I've got a copy of it right here. I talk about, how the cult of the leader and how they've, the true believer thing and all that. I talk about that in there. But then the book where I talk about this the most is called The Danger of an American Years of Lead. And it's this book where I talked about the Luigi Mangione situation, why fomenting political violence is a way of, controlling, opposition. And then what I wrote in this book became very, very obvious after the killing of Charlie Kirk. I wrote this before the killing of Charlie Kirk. And what I wrote in this book is so blatantly obvious after the killing of Charlie Kirk. So yeah, go and read this book as well. The Danger of an American Years of Lead. All right, folks, names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us? Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? We got Fakibo in Montreal. Good to see you. Who's with us? Names and locations. Jake Howarth in Portland, Oregon. Good to see you, brother. John McCarthy in Chicago. Gabby in Chicago. JT24 in Mississippi. Cameron in New Hampshire. Alex in Brazil. Diego in the Great White North. Arlene in Milwaukee. Good to see you. Diana in Florida. Samuel from the Far East. Good to see you all. Good stuff. Good times. Dan in LA. Doing great work out there, Dan, as always. You guys, the LA team is really spectacular. You guys do really, really, really good work. Thank you. Thank you for all that you guys do. Great group of folks out there. Names and locations, folks. Names and locations. Auckland, New Zealand. Good to see you. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who is with us? Anybody else? I see Gabby sent a question, which is good. Looking forward to answering that question. And I see that Buy Me a Coffee. Did we get any questions via Buy Me a Coffee? I don't think we did. I could swear there was one, but maybe there, Buy Me a Coffee is the best way to send your questions. Go to Buy Me a Coffee. Right. But yeah, no one's sent any questions via Buy Me a Coffee. That's weird. But yeah, go to Buy Me a Coffee and send some questions. So I see that we've got some Rumble rants from Hempcar. He sent in some Rumble rants, which is good. There's another Rumble rant from Penny. That's good. But yeah, and then Gabby sent a question. But yeah, questions can be sent. The best way to send questions is to go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. That's the best way to send questions. But yeah, you can also do super chats. We accept super chats now. Justin in Salt Lake. NJ in the house. Lady Ravenhair. Good to see you. Bradley Briggs. All right. Very good. So yeah. If you want to send questions, the best way to send questions is to go to buymeacoffee.com. So I guess we'll put on some music and then I'll answer people's questions. Then I'll be done. And I will be live tomorrow evening. I don't know what time, but probably the normal time, I think. But yeah, I'm going to put on some music because I like doing music. So yeah. All right. What music are we going to put on? I'm going to put on something I haven't played a bunch of times on here already. There's certain songs that we play over and over again. We don't want to do that. Well, we can put on, this is a Marxist classic song called Whirlwinds of Danger. I've always liked it. So here we go. Whirlwinds of Danger. We'll put that on, but send questions.
Whirlwinds of danger are raging around us, overwhelming forces of darkness assail. Still in the fight to see advancing before us, red flag of liberty that yet shall prevail. Then forward, ye workers, freedom awaits you o'er all the world, on land and the sea. On with the fight for the cause of humanity. March, march, you toilers, and the world shall be free. Whirlwinds of danger are raging around us, overwhelming forces of darkness assail. Still in the fight, see advancing before us, red flag of liberty that yet shall prevail. Then forward, ye workers, freedom awaits you o'er all the world, on land and the sea. On with the fight for the cause of humanity. March, march, you toilers, and the world shall be free. Brothers and sisters in hunger are calling. Shall we be silent to their sorrow and woe? While in the fight, see our comrades are falling up. Then united and conquer the foe. Then forward, ye workers, freedom awaits you o'er all the world, on land and the sea. On with the fight for the cause of humanity. March, march, ye toilers, and the world shall be free. Off with the crowns of the tyrants of favor, down in the dust with the prince and the bear. Strike off your chains, sons and daughters of labor. Wake all humanity, for victory is near. Then forward, ye workers, freedom awaits you o'er all the world, on land and the sea. On with the fight for the cause of humanity. March, march, you toilers, and the world shall be free. Death to the kings and the rich parasites, tremble before our sacred rage. The old order down we shall strike, crops of the future harvest we will. Then forward, ye workers, freedom awaits you o'er all the world, on land and the sea. On with the fight for the cause of humanity. March, march, you toilers, and the world shall be free. Negras tormentas agitan los aires, nubes oscuras nos impiden ver, aunque nos espere el dolor y la muerte, contra el enemigo nos llama al deber. El bien más preciado es la libertad, hay que defendera con fe y con valor. Alta la bandera revolucionaria, que de triunfo sin cesar lo lleva en pos. Alta la bandera revolucionaria, que de triunfo sin cesar lo lleva en pos. En pie, pueblo vero, a la batalla hay que derrocar a la reacción. A las barricadas, por el triunfo de la confederación. A las barricadas, por el triunfo de la confederación.
Yeah, great stuff. All right. Well, Gavin sent a question. Gavin from CPI said, I feel like people are not doing enough to advocate for the release of Maduro. I agree. And, you know, we have protested outside of the jail where Maduro is being held. But yeah, let's do it again. Let's do more. Maybe that's something we can do here in New York. We have a good crew of people in New York. We just had a rally yesterday, and New York is where he's being held. Maybe we ought to have another rally near the jail where he's being held. I understand that he's being held in solitary confinement, which is considered to be a form of torture. I mean, it's just horrendous what they're doing to Maduro. It's just utterly, utterly horrendous. Whereas it also seems like now they are trying to use the earthquake to move forces into Venezuela and wreck the country. It's really, really awful what they're doing. So yes, we need to do more for Maduro. We had a rally. Also, you can write to Maduro. His address in prison is available, by the way. It's online, so you can write to him. Google it. You can actually write him letters. That's one thing. So I would recommend writing him some letters in Spanish. That would be something we can do. But yeah, maybe we can have a rally here in New York, because we had our rally and it was quite a success. I thought it was a great thing that we did. We had our rally right after he was detained. And I thought it was great that we were in the streets right after he was detained. But yeah, we got to keep up the pressure. Keep up the pressure. Yes, free Maduro and his wife. Absolutely. 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 Now, Gabby sent a question. Gabby said, since MKUltra was real, what do you think the modern equivalent is? Are social media algorithms and targeted content influencing people's thoughts and behaviors on a mass scale? Yes. Or is that comparing two different things? No, I think what they started with MKUltra is continuing right up to today. And that's the crazy thing, is that they act like they stopped doing this in the 70s. They'll never do it again. Give me a break. Give me a break. Right. They have gotten better at this. Right. And we learned through the Bush administration that they have ways of doing things. Right. Any laws that were passed, they have ways of getting around them. Right. Right. For example, extraordinary rendition. Right. If they want to torture somebody, they don't do it themselves. They just fly them to another country. The other country tortures them. The CIA stands there and watches, right? And that happened during the Civil War in El Salvador and the Civil War in Nicaragua. There was an American standing next to the Contras and the right-wing people that were torturing dissidents, right? And it's like, well, America doesn't torture. No, we just stand in the room while somebody else does. I mean, and actually, during the Bush years, America did indeed torture people, but they don't even have to, right? They just, there's loopholes, right? Military contractors, right? Some of these private military contractors, they can arrest people and hold them, right? And there's no legal recourse for them in the United States. During the Iraq War, there were journalists who were reporting on the activities of U.S. military contractors like Blackwater. They were then arrested and dragged to a jail in Iraq, and they sued the military contractor. The court said, no, you don't have any grounds, and they threw it out. Didn't happen in U.S. territory, right? So, yeah, I mean, they're doing stuff like this, on a massive scale now, and especially with social media. Again, they've learned that the way to manipulate people is to reward their behavior, and nobody's going to turn down a reward. And now you can reward people without telling them why. Right. And people don't even know where the reward is coming from. So you are absolutely right, Gabby. It's not a wrong comparison at all. What do you think of the third party that Tucker Carlson is proposing? When that third party is formed, we at CPI, we need to figure out how we can get there and meet the people involved in it. CPI does not endorse any candidates, and we do not participate in the elections. That's important because of our international ties and such. We can't be involved in anything related to elections. That said, that's going to be where good people are going to be. And there's going to be a lot of people who would join Tucker Carlson's party who are, maybe they don't know everything, but they'll be open to hearing innovationism and learning what we're about. And that's what we need to do. And that's part of the kind of thing we'll be doing at the training workshop is how do we go into spaces where there are seekers and how do we engage with seekers? That's going to be a big part of what we're doing. So yeah. Yeah, hold on. Yeah. How do we engage with seekers? How do we meet people that are looking for this and might be open to it? Look, the only thing that's going to get us out of the crisis is we need to build an innovationist movement. It is only our pro-growth, pro-working families, mass anti-imperialist, populist American patriotism, only our constructive American vision. We're the only ones that can get us out of this, right? And I wish that I could tell you something different. I could tell you to go vote for the Democrats or vote for the Republicans or vote for somebody. Only innovationism is going to get us out of this. That's it. The only future that America has is joining with the rising new economy around the world. And the only way we're going to build a real movement to get us to that is with the innovationist movement. So we have to build the innovationist movement. We have to build the Center for Political Innovation. So we need to expand our ranks. We need to get people to learn our message, and we need to build our movement. And I'm looking forward to the 7-day program, because the 7-day program is going to be where we'll solidify, and we're going to work on 3 specific things about, 3 specific outreach things that we're going to do. We're going to solidify relationships. It's going to be important. I'm very excited. There's going to be some, geographic shifts in CPI, people moving to different cities and stuff. And I am confident that coming out of August, we are going to have an organization that can very solidly march forward. And we're already doing great stuff. Wait till you see the video from yesterday's rally. If I hadn't had a long day out in the field, I was out in the sun filming all day long. Woo, it was a long day, but it was worth it. It was very important, work I'm doing. But I still got to edit the video from yesterday's rally. Got to edit the video from yesterday's rally. And wait till you see what CPI is up to. We are marching ahead, but we do need support. I'll tell you that much. And if you can donate, go to cpiusa.org and donate. And thank you to everyone who has sent us a donation. But we're going to have our 7-day national training program so that we can go into the fall ready to intervene with innovationism. And I'm very, very excited for that. Only innovationism is going to get us out of this, right? But we need the people that join this new party Tucker is launching. We need to be able to engage with them and win them to innovationism and nudge them forward. And we need to go to where people are looking. So, yes. Well, thank you, Cameron, for being here. And, we need people to get involved. It's time to build the innovationist movement. The Center for Political Innovation is marching ahead. And there are people in this chat, the best of the best, are watching right now. We have a really good crew of people, a really, really, really good crew of people. And I am excited to solidify our ranks and move ahead. The best people are with us. I'll just tell you that much, there we go. So, all right. So now in terms of Rumble rants, all right. So first one is from Penny, and Penny says the cacao farmers in Ghana and Ivory Coast are losing tons of money because of weather changes and speculation, lack of contracts. Burkina Faso invests in cacao with plantain farming to become an exporter in 2030. Well, Penny is actually working on a full presentation on that topic, which I'm very, very excited about. Penny does a lot of research into what's going on in West Africa right now. And what's happening in West Africa is an inspiration to all of us. And CPI, we are like the only voice that is screaming from the heavens about the amazing things happening in the Union of Sahel States. And we're not done screaming from the heavens about it. I know Penny's working on a new book, and we already have the book that she wrote about Ibrahim Traore. And on top of that, we're having a France out of Africa rally as part of our national 7-day program. The day before our convention, we're going to be in the streets of Chicago, honoring Ibrahim Traore and calling for France to stay out of Africa. So, yeah, we are the group in America. I mean, Uhuru does as well. Uhuru and us are the groups that are standing with Ibrahim Traore. So it's important to keep that in mind. All right. Now, Hempcar says, I have a book on the church committee that says 3 people died during the hearings. A senator on C-SPAN said someone wound up in a barrel in the river and should have gotten combat pay. Well, Hempcar, I mean, it's more than that, right? You know, I mean, one of the people, the whole Jim Jones thing, right? The guy who went down to Jonestown, right? He was a guy who was involved in the church committee hearings. He ended up getting killed on the airstrip in Guyana. And, some people think Abscam was related to that, the FBI taking revenge on Congress. That MKUltra, and MKUltra and COINTELPRO, when they had the church committee hearings, and they acknowledged a lot of it. It was kind of like Truth and Reconciliation for the 60s. Carter was the president, the first new left president, first Democrat since Lyndon Johnson. And he came in and he was, trying to talk everyone back into not hating America. And he pardoned draft dodgers, right? And let the draft dodgers all come back from Canada. And he didn't pardon draft resistors, though. People who went to jail, on purpose and went to jail. He didn't pardon them, but he did pardon people who went to Canada. He gave them amnesty and they came back. And, he had the church committee hearings and, he did a lot of stuff to try and, get America to, kind of recover from the political turmoil of the 1960s. And part of that was that they had the church committee hearings, but not everybody in the government was okay with that. And I mean, the only reason they could do them was because J. Edgar Hoover was dead, right? If Hoover had been alive, they wouldn't have been able to do the hearings and talk about COINTELPRO in the way they did. One thing that I thought was pretty wild is it used to be that if I talked about MKUltra or I talked about COINTELPRO, people would roll their eyes. They'd say, that's silly, that's crazy. I remember I was sitting in a college class at my, liberal arts college I went to in Ohio. And I said that Fred Hampton had been murdered by the FBI. And people said, that's crazy. The FBI would never murder somebody. Well, nowadays people do acknowledge these things, and that's good. I think that's partially because of the internet. But it was weird because, the church committee hearings happened and people talked about it in the 70s and then they forgot about it. And then the only people that knew about them was leftists. And most people would just roll their eyes if you said the FBI had this program to target dissidents and smear their reputations. That's crazy. Well, now we know about it again. And that's related to stuff that's gone on with the internet and all kinds of stuff. But anyway, Hempcar says, I knew a guy from the hearings I thought was a guy who said they can just control our minds by censoring the debate and things they do. The movie MKUltra shows them releasing a killer and filming him murder. Well, yeah, here's the thing, okay? And this is where it gets a little bit iffy. These 2 books that are the official histories of MKUltra maintain they didn't have the ability to, control people very effectively, right? This book especially says that basically they can't brainwash you unless you want to be brainwashed, unless you voluntarily want to be brainwashed. This book says, very little came back from it. What we're hearing on Capitol Hill, what Tom O'Neill is saying, and what Stephen Kinder is saying is, well, they did know how to implant people's memories, and your memories have a lot to do with your identity. And that they learned not only how to implant false memories into people's minds, but also how to change people's personalities based on those memories. Look, one thing that I would say is related to MKUltra, the Taliban, right? Guantanamo Bay. You think they're not, doing MKUltra shit to those guys in Guantanamo Bay? There's a reason they don't want them in regular prisons, right? In regular prisons, there's a lot more transparency. Not completely, but there's a lot more. But in Guantanamo Bay, those guys down there, we have no idea. And there are people in the Taliban government. There are Taliban guys that were released from Guantanamo Bay and are now running the government. You think those guys weren't MKUltra? Right. And, al-Jilani, the terrorist who's now the head of the Syrian government. Right now, he himself was not ever in Guantanamo Bay, but he was wanted. They wanted to take him to Guantanamo Bay, but his government has people in it that were in Guantanamo Bay. And you think they didn't MKUltra those people? Of course they did. Right. And, there's a lot of stuff like that goes on. And, even Maduro, right? I mean, there's a reason he's in solitary confinement. They're trying to manipulate Maduro right now. You can be sure. Right. And if they can figure out a way to get Maduro under their control, they'll do it. I don't know if they'll be able to, and I don't know what they would want to. And maybe they just want to, humiliate Maduro as a prize. Maybe they don't want to win him over as an asset, but they might be trying to. We don't know. We don't know what they're doing, right? Maybe they just want to, you know, make an example out of him. Here's what happens if you stand up to the U.S. and just, you know, degrade him and you know, terrorize people. Who knows what they're doing, right? That's what you need to remember about all of this. One thing that I thought was a big difference between the Bush administration and the Obama administration was that Bush and Gina Haspel, who was a CIA person who worked under Bush, the Bush family, Bush Sr., Bush Jr., Gina Haspel, and Trump a little bit, they want America to be known as a torturing country. Whereas Obama and the liberals want America to be known as not a torturing country. It's not a question of do they believe in torture or not, right? That's not the issue. The issue is, do they want to be known as a country that believes in torture or not? That's the issue, right? And the liberals think it's bad for America's image to be known as torturing people, whereas the conservatives think that it's like good at scaring people, or there's a difference in strategy. And that's what you have to remember about a lot of these things. There's a difference in strategy. You know, during slavery, for example, there was a big debate in the slave ships. Should you pack the slave ships full of slaves and have half of them die on their way to America? Or should you not pack them as tightly so all of them lived when they got back to America? And the slave traders that, you know, committed the horrendous Middle Passage and transported millions of African people to America and killed millions of them along the way. Many millions of them didn't survive. They had big debates. You know, is it better to pack the ship full of people and then a lot of them die, but then you get more maybe, or is it better to not pack the ship so the ones that are there don't die? They actually had big arguments about this. What's the most effective strategy? Both of them agreed that it was totally okay to enslave people. Both of them agreed that it was totally okay to have them die in the process, but they were debating what's the most effective strategy. That's what a lot of times the fights among the imperialists are about. Right? They all agree U.S. imperialism should dominate the world. They all agree that Wall Street and London should stay in power. They all agree that it's okay to kill people, but what's the best way to do it? That's what they disagree about. And if you read the Yankee and Cowboy War, the military-industrial complex wants to do it in the way that makes the most money. The CIA and the Eastern establishment want to do it in the way that's the most effective. And often those things are at odds with each other. The Democrats, in a lot of cases, are not the lesser of two evils. They're the more effective evil, right? And that's what you have to remember about them, is that they're trying to be evil in a way that is strategically effective, whereas the Republicans, in a lot of cases, are trying to be evil in ways that hurt the U.S. in the long term. And that's why they ousted Bush, right? Bush drove the oil prices up, right? Bush hurt, you know, America's relationship with Europe, right? They didn't mind that Bush invaded Iraq. They didn't mind that, you know, that Bush was, you know, having Wall Street run the world. They minded that he did it in a way that drove the oil prices up and made Russia strong and made Venezuela strong and made Iran strong. They're mad he did it in a way where Europe wasn't on board and that he alienated the relationship between, you know, USA and Europe. You know, today I was thinking about Wesley Clark. You remember General Wesley Clark, right? He was the head of the NATO forces, a U.S. general that was the butcher of the former Yugoslavia. He bombed Serbia, killed all kinds of people. Well, during the 2004 election, Michael Moore was making a big deal. He made Fahrenheit 9/11, this anti-Bush film, and Michael Moore supported General Wesley Clark. Well, and General Wesley Clark ran for president as a Democrat candidate against, you know, in the Democratic primary, and Michael Moore was out campaigning for him. Why was Wesley Clark running for president against Bush? Well, General Wesley Clark ran for president against George W. Bush because Bush had alienated all the NATO countries. And Wesley Clark, as the head of NATO, as the guy who bombed Yugoslavia with the Germans and the French, he needed to show that in America, not everyone in the American military supports Bush invading Iraq, which was very unpopular in Europe. And so as the head of the NATO command, he is the representative of the U.S. that doesn't agree and gave voice to and tried to show the European allies they had some say. That was a disgraceful thing for Michael Moore to do, to support General Wesley Clark. And, you know, Michael Moore, his background, I'll just tell you about Michael Moore, right? He's from Flint, Michigan. And he's one of these people that's been in alternative media his entire life, right? When he was a teenager, he started a newspaper, and, you know, there was the Flint Voice, which was like the, you know, the alternative newspaper of Flint. There was a radio show, and, you know, he's been doing alternative media stuff his whole life. In the 80s, when they were closing the factories in Flint, Michigan, that's when he made this movie that he got famous for, the award-winning documentary that he made, Roger and Me. Well, Michael Moore, he made Roger and Me. But while that was going on, he was just kind of an alternative media guy in Michigan. And he was known to be a friend of the communists. His parents, and this is the other thing, this doesn't show up. I don't know why this doesn't show up. I know this from talking to communists from Michigan. His parents were in the Communist Party USA and quit over the Khrushchev revelations, right? His parents were followers of John Gates and the John Gates faction of CPUSA, and they quit the Communist Party over the Khrushchev revelations. And then as the 1960s got involved, his parents were involved in what they called the Catholic left. All right. There was Father Roy Bourgeois and Father Grappi in Milwaukee. And Father, was it Berrigan, Daniel Berrigan? I'm probably getting the names wrong, but there was what they called the Catholic left. After Vatican II in the 1960s, there were a number of Catholic priests that were involved in civil rights and anti-war activism. And his parents were involved in that as a young man, as a kid. His parents were involved in the Catholic left. His parents were ex-Communist Party USA members who left over Khrushchev. And then, they were horrified by the Khrushchev revelations, right? And they quit with John Gates and wanted to break with the USSR. And then, you can read all about the crisis of 1956 in the Communist Party USA in my book here. And then they were part of the Catholic left. That's Michael Moore's background. And, he was just a leftist. And he would have communists on his radio show. And I mean, he was around communist groups. He made the Roger and Me documentary. From there, he was the editor of The Nation for a while, and he actually refused to The Nation magazine. He got fired from The Nation magazine because he wouldn't criticize the Sandinistas, which was a pretty bold stance to take. And as his career continued to get going in the 90s, he had a show on HBO, and he had a show on and all of this. And, the height of his career was the Bush years, right? He did Bowling for Columbine, which I thought was a pretty well-made film. I don't agree with all of it, but it was a really well-made film about American society and violence and alienation and mass shootings and stuff like that. That was pretty good. He did the Fahrenheit 9/11 movie, which I thought was actually not a very good movie. It was boring. Lots of parts of it was just an anti-Bush 2 hours of hating George W. Bush, some of which wasn't that entertaining. Some of it was pretty hard hitting, but some of it was not so good. I would say his best film he made was Sicko, which was about the healthcare system, which was very, very good. And then, he got kind of invited into the Democratic Party hierarchy. And that was kind of the end of him doing anything of value. I went to see, he made a movie about Trump. I went to see it with my wife. It was awful. It was crap. It was pure crap. I mean, it was just a bad movie. Fahrenheit 11/9, his Trump movie. It did awful at the theaters. People didn't go see it. And it was a crappy movie. I mean, it was just every 15 minutes of it should have been a different movie. And it had Russiagate stuff in it. Not a lot, because I think he knew it was bullshit, but he went along and he preached the Russiagate hoax. Right. And he had a whole big thing about, gun, the kids that survived the shooting and how they're fighting for gun control. One of those kids, he did it was like every 15 minutes should have been a different movie. It should have been a whole film of its own. It was like all these 15-minute segments of the movie about all kinds of different things that were not related. One of the segments was about like the kids who survived some school shooting. And, one of those kids, his father's an FBI agent, right? And they're on there like lobbying for gun control. And it's just like, give me a break. And it's like these teenage kids with their laptops. Look, we can raise money for Democrats to pass gun control laws. It was like, it just made you want to puke. I mean, it was just puke. The best part of it was about the West Virginia teachers strike, the wildcat strikes, the massive sick-ins that the teachers did to shut down the education system in West Virginia. That was awesome. That was the best part of the movie. Every other part of the movie was crap. I mean, he's just really turned into a crap Democrat, in a lot of ways. What's interesting is that apparently part of the reason may have been, there's two things. One of the reasons Michael Moore went downhill and this is very interesting. You want to talk about MKUltra and all of that. When during the Bush years, a conservative person who didn't agree with him went to his house, a Bush supporter went to his house with dynamite and got very close to dynamiting his home. Did that really happen? That's what he believes. And he talks about it. And like, he talks about like, oh, the FBI came to my house and saved my life. They were going to dynamite my home and blow up my home. Well, did that really happen? Or did the FBI make it happen in order to make him feel like he was rescued? You know what I'm saying? And that part of, you listen to how AOC thinks that like Tucker Carlson is out to get her, which is ridiculous, right? But AOC was so happy Tucker Carlson, one of the only anti-war voices, the only person sticking up for you, she was just so happy he was banned from TV because I get all these threats and they're all traced back to him. I don't think Tucker Carlson is trying to harm AOC, but it's like that's how they get in people's minds. They make them afraid, right? And so then they turn to the deep state for protection. Right. So there's that. The other thing is that Michael Moore's wife, Kathleen Glenn, I can't even find a photo of her. But she was his producer. She did a lot and they're now separated. They divorced and the details of their divorce are not public. Like nobody really knows exactly. She kept a low profile. She was not very public. Kathleen Glenn. And they've separated. And I wonder if she was a good influence on him. I wonder if the better stuff he did about Cuba and about the healthcare system came from her, because he hasn't done anything good since she's left him. I mean, his divorce, Kathleen Glenn, and, they were together for many years through a lot of stuff. She was with him from the time he made Roger and Me all the way up to, stuff like that. And they've separated. And I wonder how much she was influencing him in a good direction, because it seems like since she's left, he hasn't done any good work. So I don't know. I just don't know. But I will say that Michael Moore, Planet of the Humans, right? He didn't make that film. He just produced it. But that was some Malthusian bullshit, right? And in the lead up to that, right, it was right during the pandemic, he released this degrowth movie, basically. And he repeated the problem with capitalism is we just want more. We just want growth, and that degrowth shit. He started pushing degrowth right during the pandemic, and he's just really gone downhill. I mean, he's just really, it's funny, my political development in the years when I was getting into politics as a teenager, he was somebody I really, really looked up to. And he's really just turned into a shit Democrat. But even then he was supporting Wesley Clark, which was abominable. He was supporting Wesley Clark, and he was, there was always signs that something was off about him. So yeah. One thing about Michael Moore, though, is interesting is that his career, he didn't have a, it wasn't like he had a big break, right? It was like he gradually worked his way up. The climax of his career, the height of his influence was the Bush administration. Bowling for Columbine, his Oscar speech, Fahrenheit 9/11. That was like the height of his power. And that was the height of his influence politically. That didn't come I think he spent 40 years getting to that point, which is interesting, right? He had one hit in the 80s. And then he had a TV show in the 90s that was on cable that not many people watched. And it was canceled. He had one show that was canceled after 2 years. And he was at The Nation for a while. And he was just kind of this person. People didn't really know who he was. And then, the Bush years, he really just kind of became the face of anti-Bush leftism. They gave him the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival, and that, it was, he was the voice of the European opposition, the French opposition, largely to Bush. And that was kind of the height of his influence. And then when Obama got in, he just, he was in bed with the Democrats, and he just couldn't, one thing I remember is he showed up at Occupy Wall Street, and he also, he came to the Left Forum that year, the year after Occupy Wall Street. And he was talking like, we want to build a movement. But, why isn't he out leading protests? Even now, right? If Michael Moore called a protest, he could easily get tens of thousands of people there just because he's so famous. Why isn't he doing that? Well, I think it's because somebody tried to blow up his house, and, he's made an arrangement with those people to check with them before he does anything. But who knows? I don't know. At the end of the day, none of us really know. But, he was much better at one point. The other thing is that they've said part of the issue is that his films they don't have appeal for my generation and younger. His audience is he's good at making films for boomers, right? Is that, that largely the people who watched his films tend to be people that are, middle-aged or older, right? People that are in their 50s and 60s. And his audience has just aged out, right? And that he just doesn't have the appeal with younger people. And a lot of the way he frames things, right? He has this kind of folksy way of framing things that kind of appeals to the values of people that grew up, in the Cold War years, right? He has a way of speaking to them and being funny, right? It's kind of like he does the thing where he uses stock footage a lot. He uses like old like newsreel clips that are hokey from like 1950s propaganda films. Well, that's something that appeals to boomers because they grew up watching that, right? When they were in school, they had to watch some of that, right? I mean, I'm old enough, right? I went to school in the 90s and I went to school in a little tiny town. I grew up in Orville, Ohio, but until I went to 5th grade, I was in an even smaller town than Orville that didn't even have its own high school. I'm not even going to say the name of it, right? I remember, they didn't have, they had VHS, things, but there were some of the movies we had to watch in 1st grade. They didn't have VHS tapes of them, and they actually had a projector. I remember my 1st grade teacher bringing a projector. We watched a film about why you should brush your teeth. I will never forget this. It was like an old newsreel, about why you should brush your teeth. And it was in color, but it was on a projector. And I just remember it was like a cowboy show, which again, my generation, they didn't have cowboys on TV when I was a kid, but it was for, this projector film about why you should brush your teeth. That was a cowboy show, was very old. And I just remember that all I remember from the film is that the villain was named Mr. Plaque. Like you get plaque on your teeth, you don't brush your teeth. He's riding his horse into the town, and he sees that the name of the town is Sweet Rock. And he laughs maniacally. Ah, ha, ha, ha. Sweet Rock. I bet that town doesn't even have a dentist. That's what I remember. But I do remember that was not shown on a VHS to us. We watched it on a projector because I was in a little town, and, they did have VHS, but some of the educational material we watched was on a projector. So there you go. Right. Yeah. There you go. But yeah, but that's why, like Michael Moore in his movies, right? There's a lot of like clips from old, like instructional films. And that's funny to boomers because they grew up watching that. And it's funny to me because and I remember like when I was a kid, you'd watch on PBS, they'd have Bill Nye the Science Guy, and he would cut away to clips of that. And it was kind of funny. But nowadays, right, you show these Zoomers and you cut away to a clip from an old 1950s film. They don't think that's funny. They're just like, what's that? That's some old movie. I mean, it doesn't have the same effect, right? Right. But that's like a thing that Michael Moore uses, like a humor device that he uses in a lot of his films. Is he cuts to these old films, and it's just, that's not funny to kids now. I mean, why would it be funny, right? I mean, they never had to watch instructional films about brushing your teeth or anything like that. So why do they think it's funny, right? There you go. And that used to be a thing, right? It used to be a thing that before VHS, when television was still very new, it was common that there would be a film that they put on a reel and they'd send it to all the schools, and they'd put it on the projector, and the kids would watch a film about brushing your teeth or joining the army, or, why communism is bad, right? And there were a lot of that. There's a lot of that. Instructional films, they used to call them, right? One instructional film that I've enjoyed, and you can watch it on YouTube, is during World War II, all the soldiers, they had to give them political education about why World War II was happening. And they made a series of instructional films called Why We Fight. And the film that they made called The Battle of Russia, it's 5 of them. They're Why We Fight. And they're just instructional films. They showed U.S. Armed Services people about why they had to fight in World War II. And, the first one of them is called The Battle of Russia. And it tells the story of Russia fighting the Nazis. It's really pro-Soviet. It's really, really pro-Soviet. You go watch The Battle of Russia from Why We Fight. It's amazing. It compares, Lenin and Stalin to George Washington. And it talks about all the industrialization the Soviet Union was doing. And I mean, you watch it, the Soviets were our allies in World War II. Yes, Frank Capra made those films. Go watch the Battle of Russia. It's great, right? The Battle of China isn't so good because, you have to remember it wasn't just the communists that were fighting Japan. It was also the KMT. And so they kind of downplay the communism thing. So the Battle of China isn't as good, but the Battle of Russia is very good. And it's just kind of giving political education about why we're fighting the Nazis. Those are very good. But anyway, I could go on about that all night. But anyway, got to finish Hemkar's questions. You ever heard of John Potosh? Yes, he wrote Drugs as Weapons Against Us, which is great. And that every time I talk about drugs on here, every time I talk about drugs on here, people get angry with me and how dare you? And I say, like, look, are they copyrighted? I don't know. I think they probably are, but they're very easily accessible. They're all over YouTube. And, I watched them on VHS tapes when I was a kid and I really liked them, but I think they'll probably be in the public domain shortly because, but yeah, they're online. They were government issued. So they may be in the public domain. But yeah, every time I talk about drugs on here, people get triggered. And look, if you get triggered by me saying that I don't think drugs should be illegal, which I don't think anyone should ever go to jail for using drugs, but I also don't think, doing drugs is a good thing. And there are people who continue to come on here. Oh, Caleb is pushing drugs. And if me being against drugs triggers you, you have a drug problem, right? If doing drugs is just a hobby or whatever, then you shouldn't mind me saying that I think it should be legal. I don't think you should go to jail for doing it. I don't generally think people should smoke pot. That's my opinion. I don't think people should smoke pot. I don't think people should use hallucinogens. I just don't think that. If that triggers you, every time I say that, and I say, I talk about intelligence and, the kind of things John Potosh talks about in his books, that triggers people. That tells me there's something wrong. NPR on websites with flashing lights and mass shooters, fans go on them. Okay, all right. Dr. Colin Ross wrote the definitive book on MKUltra. He says there's all who read the files. You got to be careful. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of people who say stuff about MKUltra that's not proven and not credible. You got to be careful with all of this, right? And you got to be careful. Right? Nita Farahani, who speaks at World Economic Forum, says most cameras you walk past now are reading your brainwaves. Hey, okay, Hemkar, this is where you got to be careful. All right, what she said, from what I'm guessing, what she said is that the cameras have facial recognition, and that the AI that does facial recognition on the cameras also detects facial expressions and how that makes you feel. They're not literally reading your brainwaves. And this is where you got to be careful, right? And this is why it's with all this stuff, MKUltra and all of this, you can go over the edge really quick, right? And I've seen people do it, right? And you got to be really careful with all this stuff, right? And that, you can go over the edge. Don't go over the edge, right? Don't go over the edge. That's, yes, they have figured out ways of manipulating people, controlling people's behavior, implanting memories in people. Yes, they have done all of that. Yes, all that does happen. And no, it's not a conspiracy theory. And I'm sure there are a couple people that will watch this and say, you're just saying that's a conspiracy theory. And I'll say, it's in Congress. Oh, please, that's a conspiracy theory. Well, it's not a conspiracy theory. But then if you say stuff like what you just said, that they're reading your brain waves, then that feeds into the idea this is a crazy conspiracy theory. And they're not. There's an element of truth in what you're saying, which is that the cameras have AI, and that AI has facial recognition. So they're reading your face, and they're reading your facial expressions, and they're determining what you are thinking. That's true, right? And that is true. That with and that they're doing that in stores now, shit like that, like Walmart, right? Walmart. You go into Walmart, they've got cameras watching you in the store. And when you walk by the candy aisle, they're scanning your facial expressions to determine how you react to the way the candy is packaged. That's true. And that's freaking crazy. But that's just part of the reality. And look, AI is a big game changer. And I don't even know where this is going to lead. I don't even know where this is going to lead, because the thing about AI is things that you used to need humans to do manually, you don't need anymore. Right? And so monitoring people's behavior, logging people's behavior, tracking people's behavior, detecting patterns, analyzing data, is something that AI can do. And now a machine can do something that we used to have humans do. And the amount of information that is available to monitor, people that want to monitor our behavior and develop, sell us products and market things to us, and manipulate us and get us to think certain things. AI gives them the ability to do that. But then again, the forces that want to resist, AI is there for them too. So it's a big game changer. And there's an element of inflation. You have to remember with all of this, right? It's kind of like the tendency of the falling rate of profit. If a new technology is discovered by one capitalist, it's only a matter of time before his competitors have it as well, right? And that's what you have to remember. It's like, sure, Henry Ford might have invented a new way of making cars, but it was only a matter of time before Chrysler was doing it. It's only a matter of time before, General Motors was doing it, right? And so then as a result, right, overall, you have a problem of overproduction, and that there's an element of inflation in all of this, right? It's not just that the evil ones can do this. It's also the forces resisting them, and also them is fracturing. Among them, there are much more conflicting interests. So you got to keep that in mind, right? You don't want to get doomsdayish about all this. But look, AI is a big game changer. And what is possible with AI, look, even in terms of how we operate as CPI, AI has enabled us to do stuff in terms of cover designs for books, in terms of, proofreading texts and stuff that we never would have been able to do, right? And so if you think about that, AI is a big game changer. The world is going to be a different place because of AI. And unfortunately, because of our irrational capitalist system, there's going to be more poverty because of it. And that shouldn't be the case. And it's going to become even more blatantly obvious that we need to have a planned economy. Where technological advancement can lead to abundance for all. All right. Well, on that note, folks, thanks everybody. Thank you everyone who sent a question. Thank you to everybody. I love CPI. Join CPI. We're a great, great organization that's doing great stuff. And, I can't tell you how much I love our CPI community and how happy I am with the people in CPI and the way we pulled together and we're there for each other. We are a real community. And I just really, really love CPI. So dare to struggle, dare to win, everybody. I got to finish editing the video of our rally from yesterday, our July 4th rally in New York City. That was an astounding success. And yeah, looking forward to August. Dare to struggle, dare to win. Thanks, everybody. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.